Imagine yourself sinking slowly into a vast horizon of time, where the winds of the desert stretch endlessly, carrying with them whispers that have traveled across centuries, smoothing the sands, shaping the dunes, and softening the silence that hovers over the ancient lands of Persia. The air is dry yet gentle, filled with the faint aroma of earth warmed by the sun, a perfume of dust and stone that has lingered since the very beginnings of empires. The golden light of dawn begins to spread across the plains, illuminating the distant outlines of mountains that rise like guardians of memory, their peaks veiled in soft hues of purple and gold. As the light grows, the land awakens not with noise, but with a tranquil rhythm, as if every grain of sand remembers the footsteps of kings, soldiers, and travelers who once crossed these endless expanses. This is the realm where Cyrus would one day emerge, a figure destined to leave an imprint so enduring that even the silence of night cannot erase his name. But before we speak his story, let us remain here, resting in the stillness of this awakening world. The Persian Empire did not begin in haste. It unfolded like the slow blooming of a desert flower, opening its petals to reveal unexpected beauty. It is in that slowness, in that patient rhythm of time, that we will remain for a while, listening, breathing, and letting the atmosphere of antiquity surround us like a blanket of calm. You can almost hear the distant murmur of rivers, the Euphrates and the Tigris, whose waters nourished civilizations long before Persia rose. Their sound is low, like a lullaby, winding through valleys, carrying the voices of merchants and farmers, blending with the rustle of palm leaves, with the soft brushing of reed boats against the current. If you close your eyes, you may see torches glowing faintly along city walls, artisans shaping clay, scribes pressing reeds into tablets, all moving slowly, without hurry, as if aware that eternity stretches endlessly before them. Now let your body sink deeper into relaxation as you picture the first settlements that would one day form the foundations of Persia's grandeur. The houses are simple, built from mud brick, their walls cool in the heat of day, their courtyards filled with the scent of bread baked over open fires. Children's laughter drifts faintly on the wind, mingling with the low songs of shepherds guiding flocks across gentle hills. Time feels almost weightless here, every moment stretching into the next like a river flowing endlessly toward the horizon. As the desert sun climbs higher, it paints the stones with shimmering light, and each shadow lengthens with quiet dignity. The land itself seems to breathe slowly, exhaling warmth, inhaling silence. It is here that the seeds of empire are hidden, unseen but alive, waiting for the right moment to sprout. Like the steady pulse of a heart beneath the chest of the earth, destiny beats softly, preparing the stage for Cyrus, the shepherd who would become a conqueror, the conqueror who would become a liberator, the liberator who would become remembered as Cyrus the Great. But for now, we remain in this tranquil dawn. Imagine lying upon soft sand that cools beneath your hands, the faint breeze brushing across your face, carrying the sound of distant bells from caravans traveling the Silk Road before it even bore that name. You drift with the caravans, each step of the camels steady, rhythmic, hypnotic, as if they too were keeping time with your slowing heartbeat. Each detail of this world lingers not to demand attention, but to lull you, to invite you into stillness. If your mind wanders, let it wander gently into the horizon of Persia, where the stories of kings are not shouts, but whispers carried on desert winds. Here, history becomes a place of rest, a soft unfolding of memory that soothes rather than excites. Every stone, every tablet, every ruin yet to be built and broken, all exist in harmony with this quiet rhythm of time. It is a place where the vastness of empire meets the intimacy of silence, where greatness itself is told like a bedtime story. And as you listen, as you let your breathing slow, as you sink into the desert's calm, I invite you to stay with me in this journey. Together we will wander through the reign of Cyrus, through the rise of Darius, through the lives and legacies that turned dust into empire and silence into memory. If this calm unfolding of history brings you peace, let your presence here be felt. Leave a gentle trace by liking this journey, by sharing it with those who also seek rest, by adding your voice in the form of a quiet comment. And if you wish to continue walking with us through these ancient landscapes, subscribe so that each night when silence deepens, you may return here and drift again through the timeless corridors of history. Now close your eyes more fully. Let the sands of Persia spread beneath you, endless and serene, carrying you deeper into rest. The dawn of empire has begun, not with noise but with silence, and in that silence you are safe to drift, safe to rest, safe to dream. Block 2. The early path of Cyrus. Drift deeper now into the unfolding silence of ancient Persia, where the story of Cyrus begins not in the thunder of conquest, but in the fragile cradle of obscurity. Picture the wide, rolling fields of Anshan, a landscape painted with the soft strokes of green grasses and golden hills, stretching endlessly toward the horizon. The air carries the faint scent of earth warmed by the sun, mingled with the distant fragrance of wild herbs that grow stubbornly in the crevices of stone. Each morning the plains awaken slowly, not with noise, but with the hum of shepherds guiding their flocks, the faint bleating of goats and the laughter of children, echoing gently through courtyards shaded by mud-brick walls. It is within this quiet tapestry that Cyrus first opened his eyes, unaware that destiny had already etched his name into the fabric of eternity. Imagine the nights of his earliest years, when the sky stretched vast and clear above the countryside, each star glowing like an ancient lamp suspended in endless darkness. In those nights, silence wrapped itself around villages, broken only by the low crackle of fires and the distant howl of wolves beyond the hills. In a humble home, built from clay and stone, a child slept under rough blankets, his breath soft and steady, the shadows of the hearth flickering across his face. This child was Cyrus, though at that time he was only known as the son of simple guardians, cared for by a herdsman and his wife who loved him as their own. They could not know that they were sheltering the seed of empire, a seed that would one day grow to embrace lands stretching from the rising sun to the edge of the Mediterranean. Fate had tried to silence him even before his life had truly begun. His grandfather, Astyages, king of the Medes, had been disturbed by dreams that seemed too heavy with meaning to ignore. Dreams of rivers flowing from his daughter, covering the world. Dreams of vines wrapping themselves around lands far beyond his reach. In those visions, the shadow of Cyrus appeared. Though Astyages did not yet know his name, fear drove him to act, for kings, though powerful, are often prisoners of their own visions. Orders were whispered, commands given, that the child born from such omens should not be allowed to live. But fate does not bend so easily to human command. It bends like the wind, unseen yet unstoppable, slipping through cracks, carrying with it the seeds of inevitability. And so Cyrus was spared, taken into the arms of Mithridates, the herdsman, and his wife, who raised him with the tenderness of parents who had lost their own child. Their home was simple, a dwelling of mud-brick walls that cooled in the heat of day, its courtyard alive with the fragrance of baking bread and the murmur of water stored in clay jars. Life here moved at the pace of the seasons, the rhythm of flocks grazing by day and fires glowing by night. Within this world, Cyrus grew quietly, learning strength not from palaces, but from the endurance of the land, from the patience of shepherds, from the wisdom of elders whose stories wove the fabric of memory. The fields became his teachers, the hills his companions, the rivers his guides. When he ran across the plains, the earth itself seemed to rise to meet his stride. When he spoke, others listened, drawn not by command but by the subtle pull of something they could not name. Even in youth, his presence seemed different, as though the invisible threads of fate were already tightening around him, pulling him toward a horizon far beyond the vision of those who watched him grow. Stories of his childhood linger in whispers carried by the wind. It is said that when the boys of his village played together, Cyrus often chose the role of king, arranging stones and branches into a throne, directing the others as if the play itself demanded his command. His friends obeyed without hesitation, as though some hidden law compelled them. What began as innocent games echoed with the rhythm of truth, for within the laughter of children, the future sometimes reveals itself quietly, without urgency, without announcement, like dawn creeping softly over the edge of night. Life in Anshan, though modest, was rich with the steady beauty of simplicity. Picture Cyrus at dusk, walking through fields as the sun fell in long streaks of crimson and gold, the air cooling, the shadows lengthening. The calls of shepherds rose and fell like chants, mingling with the first songs of crickets and the rustle of leaves stirred by the evening breeze. In these moments, Cyrus would sit near the fire, listening to the old ones tell stories of gods and heroes, of battles fought in forgotten lands, of kings who rose and fell like waves upon the shore. Their words carried the memory of Ahura Mazda, the wise lord who guided the universe with light and truth. The boy listened quietly, but within him those words did not fade. They settled deep, like seeds planted in fertile soil, waiting to bloom when the time was right. As years turned, Cyrus grew into youth, his body strong, his spirit unyielding. The calm of the fields remained in him, but beneath it stirred the quiet power of leadership. His eyes no longer carried the innocence of a child, but the fire of one who sensed, perhaps dimly, the immensity of what lay ahead. His presence unsettled some, inspired others, and still, beyond the horizon, his grandfather Astyages lived, haunted by the dreams that would not release him. Destiny was moving slowly but with certainty, as it always does. When Cyrus was summoned at last to the court of Astyages, he entered halls heavy with incense and draped with tapestries, the air thick with the perfume of power. Courtiers whispered, eyes turned, silence stretched as the young man stood before the king. He bowed, but his posture did not bend fully. His voice, though respectful, did not tremble. There was something in him that filled the chamber with unease, as if the very stones beneath the palace walls recognized him. Though he was dressed in simple garments, his bearing was that of one already cloaked in the invisible mantle of authority. The Medes were powerful, their armies vast, their wealth shining in gold and silver. But within those walls, something far stronger than armies was already at work. A seed of change had been planted, a whisper of destiny that no fear could silence. Cyrus, once the shepherd boy hidden in the arms of a herdsman, stood on the threshold of history, his path stretching out before him like an endless plain under starlight. The nights of Persia turned, the stars shifted silently overhead, and the world itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the moment when the boy would rise, when the dreams of Astyages would break from vision into reality. The early path of Cyrus was not one of noise but of silence, not of crowns, but of whispers, not of violence, but of inevitability. The world watched in stillness, as though aware that from this quiet youth, an empire would one day grow, vast enough to touch the edges of the known world, gentle enough to be remembered not only for its might, but for its mercy. And as you drift within this moment, carried by the slow river of his beginnings, you may feel yourself sinking deeper into rest, the weight of history becoming a blanket, the rhythm of time becoming a lullaby, guiding you softly toward the horizon where destiny waits, where dawn is always just about to break. Block 3, The Rising Shadow of Destiny. The silence of Persia's plains lingered, stretched wide and unbroken. Yet beneath that calmness, something deeper stirred, something invisible to the eye but palpable to the heart, like a distant vibration carried on the wind. Cyrus, no longer a boy, had grown into a man whose stride seemed to move with the rhythm of inevitability. He was still known by some as the shepherd's child, but those who looked closer saw more. They saw a presence that could not be explained, an aura that suggested that history itself had chosen him long before he could speak his first words. Imagine the court of Astyages, king of the Medes, where walls of thick stone rose high above valleys, casting shadows that seemed to stretch into eternity. Within these walls, torches burned with fragrant oils, tapestries shimmered with patterns of animals and gods, and courtiers whispered behind veils of silk, their voices weaving a constant murmur of fear and intrigue. Astyages sat upon his throne, his crown heavy with jewels, his garments layered with gold thread embroidery. But within him there was little peace. The old king was haunted still by the dreams of his youth, dreams of rivers flowing from his daughter, drowning the land, dreams of vines spreading, curling, binding the world in their embrace. He had tried once to sever those visions at their root, to silence destiny by ordering the death of a child. Yet destiny had evaded his hand, slipping quietly into the arms of shepherds and into the safety of fields far from the palace. And now, that child had returned as a man, standing before him with eyes that seemed to carry both humility and fire. When Cyrus first entered the court, the air shifted. Servants lowered their eyes but could not resist glancing upward. Soldiers felt their spines straighten, though no command was given. Courtiers whispered, their voices trembling between curiosity and fear. Cyrus did not swagger, nor did he bow in excess. He moved with the calmness of the fields, the steadiness of rivers, the patience of mountains. He was clothed simply, but it was as if an invisible garment of authority draped itself upon him. Astyages watched, unease tightening within him, for he recognized in this young man the echo of his dreams. The shadow that had followed him for decades now stood living and breathing in his halls. Whispers began to spread beyond the palace. They traveled down stone corridors, across marketplaces, along dusty roads. The name of Cyrus was spoken not in shouts, but in low tones, like a prayer murmured at dusk. Soldiers felt it, the people sensed it, merchants carried it with their caravans. There was something in him that did not belong only to Anshan, nor only to the Medes, but to the whole land. His presence alone carried the weight of a future that could not be denied. In time, that presence became movement. What began as whispers turned into allegiance, quiet at first, then steady, then unbreakable. Soldiers who had served Astyages began to look toward Cyrus with loyalty, not out of rebellion alone, but out of recognition. They saw in him not the hunger of ambition, but the certainty of destiny. When he spoke of justice, men believed. When he called for courage, men followed. His words spread like seeds scattered across fertile ground, taking root in hearts weary of fear, eager for hope. Picture the gathering of armies beneath starry skies, their fires glowing like constellations upon the earth. Men sat in circles, sharpening weapons, whispering prayers, their voices blending with the low hum of the desert wind. Horses shifted quietly, their breath misting in the cool night air. Banners lay rolled beside them, waiting for dawn. Among them, the name of Cyrus passed from lip to lip, steady and unshaken, like the beat of a drum guiding them into the unknown. For though war awaited, there was a strange calmness in their ranks, as though each soldier knew he was walking within the current of something greater than himself. When battle came, it did not roar suddenly but rose slowly, like a storm swelling at the horizon. Astyages' armies, once feared across the land, marched with heavy steps, their shields flashing in the sun. Yet within their hearts there was hesitation, for the weight of destiny cannot be ignored, even by those sworn to fight against it. On the other side stood Cyrus, his presence steady, his commands measured, his figure calm amidst the clamor of preparation. He was not merely a commander, he was a vision fulfilled, and those who looked upon him felt as though they were seeing not a man, but the very shape of tomorrow. The clash of armies echoed across the plains, iron against iron, shield against spear, the sound rising and falling like waves against a shore. Dust rose in thick clouds, veiling the sun, turning the battlefield into a haze of shadow and light. Yet within that haze the tide turned, not through chaos but through inevitability. Astyages' men faltered, not because they lacked strength, but because their hearts no longer belonged to him. The weight of his crown felt heavy, almost hollow, while Cyrus seemed to carry an invisible crown already, one that shone brighter than jewels, one woven from destiny itself. And when the end came, it came not as a shattering but as a yielding. Astyages fell, his power dissolved, his crown no longer his own. The Medes, who had ruled with pride, bowed to Persia, not with hatred but with reluctant acceptance, as though they too knew the truth, that history had chosen a new ruler. Cyrus did not destroy the Medes. He absorbed them, uniting their strength with his own, binding two peoples together into one empire. From opposition came harmony, from division came unity. The shepherd boy had become king, yet more than king. He had become the river of destiny flowing freely at last, unstoppable, steady, eternal. The whispers of prophecy, once hidden in the dreams of Astyages, now moved openly through the land, carried by the voices of soldiers, of merchants, of common men and women. The world had shifted, the Medes' rule had ended, the age of Persia had begun, and as night returned, as the stars looked down upon a land forever changed, silence once again settled over the plains. But it was not the silence of uncertainty. It was the silence that follows a great turning, the silence of a world holding its breath, aware that something vast had just begun. In that stillness, Cyrus stood at the threshold of empire, and the shadow of destiny stretched wide across the horizon, promising conquests, reforms, and a legacy that would echo long after the sands had shifted, long after the fires of battle had cooled, long after the voices of that age had fallen silent. Block 4. The first conquests of Cyrus. The rise of Cyrus did not come with sudden noise, nor with the wild fire of reckless ambition, but with the patient strength of mountains that endure the passing of centuries. From the unification of the Medes and Persians, a foundation was laid, strong enough to carry the weight of an empire yet to unfold. And slowly, like dawn spreading across a horizon, Cyrus began to extend his reach, not as a tyrant eager for blood, but as a ruler whose vision moved steadily outward, guided by calm inevitability. Picture the lands that stretched beyond Persia's heart. Valleys wide with fertile soil, mountains etched with paths that wound like serpents into hidden kingdoms, rivers winding endlessly toward seas that sparkled beneath the sun. These were lands watched by other kings, lands guarded by other thrones, but all of them, though mighty in their own measure, would soon feel the presence of Cyrus, as quiet as the breeze, as unstoppable as the tide. The first steps of his expansion carried him toward the kingdom of Lydia, a land of wealth, a land where gold ran through rivers like veins of light, where King Croesus, famed for his riches, ruled with pride. Before Cyrus ever set foot on Lydia's soil, tales of Croesus's treasures had spread across the world: jewels, coins of shining gold, palaces that glimmered beneath the sun. To challenge such a king was to challenge not only armies, but the very idea of prosperity itself. Yet Cyrus did not march blindly. He moved with patience, with strategy woven from both wisdom and silence. Imagine the preparations of his soldiers, the slow march across plains and mountains, their footsteps steady, their banners rippling softly in the wind. At night they rested beneath skies alive with constellations, fires glowing like fallen stars upon the earth. The men whispered not of greed, but of destiny. They felt themselves carried along by the calm certainty of their leader, who spoke not with the fury of command, but with the quiet assurance of one who knew the outcome long before the battle had begun. Each word from Cyrus seemed to settle into their hearts, like a stone into still water, creating ripples of courage that spread through the ranks. The clash with Lydia unfolded not in haste, but in stages, like the unfolding of a scroll. Croesus's armies were vast, their armor gleaming, their cavalry swift. Yet Cyrus watched patiently, measuring every movement, every strength, every weakness. When the armies met, the earth trembled with the thunder of hooves. The sky darkened with dust. The sound of steel rang across valleys like a chorus of storms. But amid that chaos, Cyrus remained calm, his strategies precise, his presence unshaken. He used not only strength but wisdom, guiding his soldiers with maneuvers that turned Croesus's pride into vulnerability. And when the moment came, when Croesus found himself surrounded, his wealth powerless against the tide of destiny, the silence of inevitability fell once more. The Lydian king, once the richest of rulers, stood humbled before the Persian conqueror. Yet Cyrus, unlike so many kings before him, did not raise his hand in cruelty. He chose mercy, sparing Croesus's life, absorbing his kingdom not with destruction, but with assimilation. The Lydians became part of Persia, their wealth flowing into the veins of the empire, their culture blending into its growing heart. It was conquest, yes, but it was also unification, the weaving together of threads into a fabric stronger than any single strand. From Lydia, Cyrus turned his gaze further, toward the great cities of Babylon, toward the distant reaches of Central Asia, where tribes roamed across steppes vast as oceans. Each campaign carried its dangers, yet each also carried the same steady rhythm: preparation, patience, inevitability. His soldiers marched not with desperation, but with calm endurance, as if they understood they were not merely fighting battles, but participating in the unfolding of history itself. And in every land he touched, the story repeated. Resistance met with strength, defeat softened by mercy. Enemies transformed into subjects, subjects transformed into citizens. Imagine now the growing empire, stretching outward like ripples across water. The Persian banners rose over Lydia, over Media, over countless cities and valleys. Roads were carved through mountains, bridges laid across rivers, communication flowing more swiftly than ever before. Merchants traveled under the safety of Persian protection, their caravans moving like lifelines through the arteries of empire. Priests, scribes, farmers, artisans, all found themselves part of something larger than they had ever known. An empire whose reach extended further with each passing year. And yet through it all, Cyrus never abandoned the qualities that first set him apart. He ruled not only through force, but through fairness. He respected the gods of conquered peoples, allowing them to worship freely, to keep their temples, to honor their traditions. Where other conquerors tore down, he built up. Where others enslaved, he freed. It was this mercy, this tolerance, that made his empire not merely vast, but enduring. His name spread not only as a conqueror, but as a liberator, remembered even in the scriptures of peoples far from Persia's heart. The first conquests of Cyrus were not simply victories of war, they were victories of vision. They transformed Persia from a rising power into a true empire, one whose borders touched seas, mountains, deserts, and fertile plains. And as the sun set upon each battlefield, as fires glowed within new cities brought under Persian rule, the silence of destiny deepened. The shepherd boy had become king, the king had become conqueror, and the conqueror had become something more. The architect of a world that stretched beyond imagination. And as you drift with these images, soldiers marching beneath starlight, kings bowing to fate, cities opening their gates not to destruction but to renewal, let your own breath slow. The story of Cyrus's first conquests is not told as noise but as calm unfolding, a reminder that even the greatest tides of history can move with quiet inevitability, carrying with them not only power, but peace. Block 5, the expanding horizons of Cyrus. The empire of Cyrus stretched outward, with a rhythm that felt less like conquest, and more like the steady unfolding of inevitability, as if time itself were unrolling a vast scroll upon which his name had already been written. From the valleys of Persia to the mountains that guarded its frontiers, from the golden wealth of Lydia to the distant rivers of Mesopotamia, the horizons of the new empire widened slowly, steadily, and with a quiet majesty that seemed to soothe rather than startle. There was no chaos in this expansion, no wild frenzy of destruction, but a calm spreading of influence, a gradual weaving together of lands and peoples into a fabric that seemed destined to endure. Imagine the map of the ancient world as it was before Cyrus's reign, divided into kingdoms and tribes, each with its own gods, languages, and rulers. There were the Medes in their fortified hills, the Lydians surrounded by treasures, the Babylonians protected by walls so high that travelers could scarcely believe they had been raised by human hands, and the scattered tribes of Central Asia who rode their horses across steppes vast as oceans. Into this patchwork, Cyrus moved, not like a hammer breaking apart stone, but like a river that finds every crack, every valley, every hollow, filling it gently and reshaping it without haste. One of the most remarkable things about Cyrus's expansion was the way he carried with him not only the sword, but also mercy, tolerance, and vision. Where others might have burned temples, he restored them. Where others might have enslaved, he freed. His victories did not leave behind smoking ruins but living cities, each one tied to Persia through respect and protection. And so, as Persia grew, so too did its reputation. Traders whispered of its fairness. Priests spoke of its tolerance. Conquered peoples told stories not of chains but of unexpected freedom. It was as though the very character of Cyrus had been stamped upon the empire itself, creating a realm where power was not only feared but admired. Picture the long marches of his armies now, moving across mountains dusted with snow, through valleys green with spring, across deserts where the sun beat down mercilessly upon the earth. At night, the soldiers rested beneath a dome of stars, fires glowing faintly as voices drifted in song and prayer. They were not driven only by duty or fear of command. They were carried forward by the quiet confidence of their leader, who seemed to embody the very certainty of destiny. His presence was steady, never hurried, never shaken, as though he already saw the outcome waiting beyond the horizon, beyond Lydia, beyond Media, beyond the smaller tribes that had resisted and been absorbed. The name of Cyrus reached toward Babylon, the city of cities, the jewel of Mesopotamia, the pride of kings who had ruled for centuries. To think of Babylon was to think of walls so massive they could host chariots racing across their tops, of gardens said to hang in the air like green mountains suspended by stone, of ziggurats that reached toward the heavens as if they were stairways for gods. It was a place that seemed eternal, untouchable, too grand to ever bow to any conqueror. And yet, like the slow advance of dawn, Cyrus's presence drew nearer, inevitable in its quiet strength. Before Babylon, there were the tribes of the east. These peoples were swift, their horses strong, their arrows sharp, their movements unpredictable. Many empires before Persia had tried to subdue them, only to fail, for the steppes were too wide, the tribes too elusive. But Cyrus approached them with patience, not with reckless pursuit. He moved carefully, securing alliances where he could, pressing forward slowly where he must, always leaving behind stability rather than chaos. In time, even the wild freedom of the steppes bent quietly into the greater harmony of the empire, not crushed, but absorbed, their strength woven into Persia's growing power. With each victory, with each new land brought under Persian protection, the empire did not splinter under its own weight, but grew more organized, more efficient, more stable. Roads were extended, connecting city to city, valley to valley. Messengers carried orders and news swiftly, their horses racing across the earth with a speed that made the empire feel smaller, more connected. Markets flourished, filled with goods from distant lands, spices, silks, gold, and grains, all protected by the shield of Persia's reach. The great empire began to breathe like a single body, each region a vital organ, each road a vein through which life flowed. And through all of this, Cyrus maintained the qualities that first drew men to him: humility, fairness, and mercy. He allowed each conquered people to worship their own gods, to keep their traditions, to live with dignity beneath the shelter of his crown. He did not erase their identities, but preserved them, binding them together through respect rather than fear. In this way, his empire became not only vast, but deeply rooted, for its strength lay not in forced obedience, but in willing loyalty. As you drift through these images, armies moving like rivers across the land, cities opening their gates without flames consuming them, priests offering prayers not in chains but in freedom, you may feel a calmness settling over you. The expansion of Cyrus was not a storm to be feared, but a tide that lifted ships gently upward, carrying all who sailed upon it into a wider, brighter horizon. His vision stretched far beyond what any king before him had imagined, and yet it unfolded with such steadiness, such patience, that it seemed less like conquest and more like destiny itself unfolding. Slow, certain, eternal. Block 6. The Fall of Babylon. The horizon of history stretched wide, and upon it the name of Babylon glowed like a fire that had burned for centuries. No city was more famed, no city more feared. Its walls were said to be so thick that chariots could race along their tops. Its towers rose like mountains of stone, crowned with temples where priests burned incense to gods older than memory. Its gates, adorned with lions and dragons, stood as symbols of power that seemed untouchable. For generations, Babylon had been the heart of Mesopotamia, the city of Hammurabi's laws, the home of Nebuchadnezzar's dreams, the jewel of rivers that gave life to the cradle of civilization. To imagine its fall was to imagine the impossible. Yet Cyrus moved toward it, not with haste, but with the patient rhythm of destiny, calm and steady, as if the very stars guided his steps. Picture the plain stretching before the city, wide and fertile, the Euphrates winding like a silver serpent through fields of grain and groves of palm. Soldiers camped upon its banks, their fires flickering like constellations fallen to the earth, their voices hushed. For even in the presence of such a city, awe silenced them. Babylon's walls loomed in the distance, massive and unbroken, their shadows long upon the earth. Many said those walls could never be breached, that no army could overcome them, that Babylon was eternal. But Cyrus, in his stillness, saw what others could not. He saw not only walls, but water. He saw not only strength, but weakness hidden within strength. For where walls stood, rivers also flowed, and rivers, unlike stone, could be diverted, could be turned, could become pathways where once there was only barrier. And so a plan formed, not of wild assault, but of patience. The Euphrates, lifeblood of Babylon, was quietly redirected, its waters lowered, its current slowed, until beneath the dark of night the riverbed itself became a path. Imagine the silence of that moment. Soldiers moving like shadows, their armor muted, their feet sinking softly into damp earth, the air cool and heavy with the scent of water and clay. They entered not with fire, but with quiet steps, the city unaware, its gates closed, its people lulled into false security by the immensity of their walls. While revelry filled the palaces, while feasts and wine dulled the senses of Babylon's rulers, the soldiers of Cyrus slipped silently into the heart of the city. The fall of Babylon came not with thunder, but with silence. No towers toppled, no gates shattered. The streets that had once echoed with pride now echoed with the sound of footsteps in the dark, the murmur of soldiers moving unseen. By dawn, the city that had stood unconquered for centuries awoke to find itself not destroyed, but transformed. Babylon belonged to Persia. And yet Cyrus did not claim it with cruelty. He did not burn its temples nor enslave its people. Instead, he offered freedom. He restored shrines to their gods. He allowed exiled peoples to return to their homes. He walked through its gates not as a destroyer, but as a liberator. The Jewish exiles, long held within Babylon's walls, were freed to return to Jerusalem and rebuild their temple. The priests of Marduk found their sanctuaries honored, their rights respected. Cyrus issued decrees carved into clay cylinders, words that spoke of tolerance, of restoration, of justice. It was as though the greatest city of the ancient world had not been defeated, but gently folded into something greater. Its pride preserved, its people respected, its legacy made part of Persia's own. Imagine standing within the city in those days, the streets alive with whispers, some voices heavy with disbelief, others trembling with relief. Merchants unpacked their goods, priests lit fires upon their altars, exiles gathered their belongings with tears of joy. The markets filled again, not with fear but with the hum of life continuing. The walls still stood, the towers still rose, the gardens still hung, but above it all there was a new presence, not of arrogance, but of quiet strength. The Lion of Babylon now lay beside the rising star of Persia, and together they formed a symbol not of ruin, but of unity. The fall of Babylon was more than conquest. It was transformation. It showed the world that empires need not be built on ashes, that victory need not mean desolation. Under Cyrus, Babylon became part of something vast, something patient, something merciful. The city that had once seemed eternal did not vanish, but was given new life within the embrace of Persia. And as the Euphrates flowed once more through its gates, the people of Babylon learned that even the strongest walls cannot hold back the river of destiny, and that sometimes the quietest victories are the ones that last forever. And so, as you drift deeper into this vision, imagine the stillness of that night when soldiers walked the empty riverbed, the cool air brushing their faces, the stars reflecting faintly in pools of shallow water. The city above them, silent, unaware of the tide that was about to sweep through its heart. Let the image of Babylon's fall settle upon you not as violence, but as calm inevitability, a reminder that even the mightiest structures yield in time, and that destiny, like a river, always finds its way. Block 7, the consolidation of empire. The fall of Babylon had marked not only the triumph of a king, but the turning of an age. With its colossal gates open and its temples preserved, with its exiled peoples freed and its priests left unbroken, the Persian Empire had grown into something that stretched beyond the usual definition of conquest. No longer was Cyrus merely a conqueror. He had become a figure who reshaped the very idea of empire itself. The world, vast and varied, had bent beneath his vision not through terror, but through a combination of strength and mercy, a rare balance that turned subjects into citizens and conquered peoples into willing participants in a greater whole. Imagine the vastness of Persia now, extending from the shores of the Mediterranean to the high plateaus of Central Asia, from the valleys of the Tigris and Euphrates to the mountains that touched the eastern horizon. Within its borders lived men and women who spoke dozens of languages, who prayed to gods with different names, who carried with them traditions older than memory. And yet, under Cyrus, they were woven together into a single fabric. The task of ruling such a tapestry was not one of violence alone, for no sword, no matter how sharp, could hold together so many threads. It required something else: patience, vision, tolerance, and a system that allowed each thread to retain its color while binding firmly into the whole. Cyrus understood this. His empire did not erase differences but preserved them. The Babylonians continued their worship of Marduk. The Jews, freed from exile, rebuilt their temple in Jerusalem. The Lydians carried on with their trade and minted coins of shining gold, now stamped beneath the protection of Persia. Everywhere the eye turned, peoples retained their ways, yet now they lived within the security of Persian law, the protection of Persian soldiers, the stability of Persian order. It was as though the empire had become a vast house with many rooms, each decorated differently, but all under the same roof, protected from the storms beyond. Picture the roads that stretched like veins across this house, carved through deserts, cutting across mountains, bridging rivers. Along them, couriers rode at full gallop, carrying messages faster than had ever been possible before, connecting distant corners of the empire with remarkable speed. Markets flourished, not only in Babylon and Susa, but in countless smaller towns where traders could move safely, knowing the king's authority protected their paths. Caravans crossed from east to west, their camels laden with silks, spices, gold, and grain, their bells ringing softly in the air like distant chimes. In their movements, the empire itself breathed, a vast body alive with commerce, culture, and exchange. And yet beneath this growing order, there was silence too. A silence not of emptiness, but of peace. Farmers tilled their fields without fear of raiders. Artisans shaped pottery, carved stone, wove cloth, their hands steady, their livelihoods secure. Priests offered prayers without the shadow of oppression. Families gathered in courtyards at dusk, listening to stories beneath stars that stretched endlessly overhead, knowing that their tomorrow would not be broken by sudden war. This was the gift of consolidation, stability that stretched across lands so wide that even the imagination struggled to contain them. Cyrus's policies reflected his understanding of power as something larger than brute force. He issued decrees, carved into stone and clay, that proclaimed freedom of worship, restoration of temples, and protection of the weak. These were not mere gestures, but principles that echoed through the empire, ensuring that loyalty grew not from fear alone, but from gratitude. His words reached beyond borders, carried not only by soldiers, but by scribes, merchants, and travelers, until his reputation spread into lands he had not yet touched. To many, Cyrus was not just a ruler. He was a symbol of justice itself. Imagine standing in Babylon in the months after its fall, watching as life returned to the streets. The markets buzzed again, the temples filled with worshippers, the city's canals flowed as they had for centuries. But there was a difference. No longer did the people live under the weight of uncertainty. No longer did they fear the whims of rulers who cared little for their lives. They saw in Cyrus a king who had respected their gods, a king who had listened, a king who had not crushed them into dust but folded them gently into a greater whole. That memory lingered, and it made his empire more enduring than walls, more powerful than armies. As the empire stabilized, Cyrus turned his gaze to administration, understanding that a realm so vast required more than soldiers and decrees. It required structure. He began to lay the foundations of what would later become the Persian system of satrapies, regions governed by trusted officials, each responsible for maintaining order, collecting tribute, and ensuring the king's will was carried out. These governors, though powerful, were bound by loyalty to Cyrus, their authority balanced by oversight, their actions measured against the standard he set. It was a system that gave local leaders space to govern, but always within the shelter of Persian law. The effect was profound. Lands that might have rebelled under harsh rule found themselves cooperating, not out of compulsion, but because the system allowed them dignity. Tribute flowed into the empire, not merely as plunder, but as contribution, as participation in something larger than themselves. Roads were maintained, cities flourished, and culture spread across borders, blending influences from east and west into new forms of art, architecture, and thought. The empire was no longer simply a patchwork of conquests. It had become a living organism, each part vital, each part nourished. In this slow, steady way, Cyrus transformed the world. He showed that empires could be built not only upon fear, but upon respect, not only upon the ashes of destruction, but upon the foundations of preservation. And because of this, his reign did not feel like the tightening of chains, but like the unfolding of protection. To be part of Persia was to be part of something vast, something stable, something merciful. It was a vision so rare that it echoed long after Cyrus himself was gone, remembered in scriptures, praised by philosophers, honored by rulers who came centuries later. And so, as you let this vision settle upon you, imagine the empire not as noise, but as calmness spreading across the land, a quiet order reaching from one horizon to another. Picture roads stretching into the distance, caravans moving slowly beneath the sun, cities glowing softly at dusk, temples filled with prayers, families resting in peace. This was the consolidation of empire, not the roar of conquest, but the deep sigh of a world finally at rest, gathered gently beneath the shelter of a king who understood that true power lies not only in might, but in mercy. Now, let that image remain with you as you breathe slowly, deeply, allowing the calm rhythm of Persia's order to sink into you like the soft murmur of a lullaby. For in the reign of Cyrus, conquest had given way to harmony, and harmony had given way to peace, a peace vast enough to cradle nations and gentle enough to lull you further into rest. Block 8, a tapestry of cultures and faiths. The Persian Empire, after the fall of Babylon, unfolded not as a silence imposed by fear, but as a great canopy beneath which countless voices, faiths, and traditions were allowed to continue breathing. Cyrus had entered the city not with flames, but with reverence, and from that moment forward, the identity of his empire became something rare in the ancient world. A harmony of differences, a deliberate preservation of the many threads of culture woven into a single vast tapestry. Imagine that tapestry stretched across the known world, shimmering with colors that did not blend into uniformity, but retained their distinct hues while still belonging to the same design. From the golden threads of Lydia's wealth, where coins glinted in the hands of merchants, to the deep blue threads of Babylonian ritual, where incense curled through air heavy with prayer, to the silver threads of the Jews, who lifted psalms of hope as they returned to Jerusalem, to the white threads of the Persians themselves, guardians of the whole. Each piece remained vivid, yet all were held together under the quiet strength of Cyrus's hand. Step now into Babylon in the years after its surrender. The streets no longer echo with the panic of conquest, but with the hum of daily life restored. Priests in linen robes continue their processions, carrying small lamps as dusk falls, their chants to Marduk resonating through vast temple courtyards. The smell of burning oils mingles with the sweet fragrance of dates sold in baskets along the roads. Children run between vendors, their laughter blending with the call of merchants shouting prices in Aramaic. Overhead, the towers rise as they always have, ziggurats climbing like stairways toward heaven, their bricks warmed by the glow of the setting sun. Nothing here has been broken. Everything has been folded into something larger. Now travel west in your mind's eye toward Judea. Along dusty paths, caravans of exiles move slowly homeward. Elders walk with staffs, leaning heavily yet joyfully, their eyes moist as they sing old songs of return. Mothers carry infants on their hips. Fathers push carts filled with clay jars, scrolls, and tools. Children skip ahead, collecting stones from the roadside, unaware that they are walking into history. On their lips rise psalms of restoration, each note carrying gratitude not only to their God, but to the Persian king who made such return possible. This is not the story of a people crushed under empire, but of a people restored through it. Turn northward now, toward the Median hills. Here, shepherds guide flocks across slopes dusted with wildflowers, their flutes echoing against cliffs as twilight settles. The songs they play are ancient, carrying stories of ancestors long before Cyrus, and yet now those songs float peacefully beneath Persian protection. Their villages remain intact, their altars still lit with small flames, their traditions unbroken, their loyalty ensured not by chains but by the calm security of an empire that does not demand erasure. Eastward, beyond the Zagros, tribes of the highlands and steppes ride their horses across open plains. They are swift, independent. Their language is unfamiliar to those of Babylon or Lydia, and yet even here the reach of Persia is felt. The riders, fierce in freedom, do not find their shrines torn down, their lands scorched. Instead, they are acknowledged, absorbed, given place within the whole. Their strength becomes Persia's strength, their identity preserved while their loyalty steadies the frontier. Return again to the markets of the empire, those arteries through which life flowed. Picture Susa at dawn, its streets still cool with night air as merchants arrange wares. Jars of honey glistening in golden light, baskets of pomegranates piled high, spices spilling red and yellow into the dust, bolts of cloth dyed in blues so deep they seem like fragments of sky. The voices rise slowly as the city awakens, a Median trader bargaining in his tongue, answered by an Aramaic-speaking clerk, a Persian soldier standing guard, his presence a silent promise that the roads which brought these goods will remain safe. A group of priests passing by, murmuring prayers, their scent of incense trailing behind them. All of this unfolds not in disorder, but in calmness, like rivers flowing together into one vast sea. This mosaic of voices and rituals was sustained by a principle almost unheard of in those days: freedom of worship, respect for difference, tolerance as law. Cyrus inscribed decrees upon clay cylinders, decrees that spoke not of slaughter but of restoration. Temples should be rebuilt, gods should be honored, exiles should be freed. To the Babylonians, this meant their shrines remained sacred. To the Jews, it meant their faith regained its home. To every people under his crown, it meant dignity preserved. Such policies did not weaken the empire. They strengthened it. Rebellion, so common in conquered lands, was less frequent because resentment was less heavy. Tribute flowed not only because of fear, but because of recognition that the empire gave more than it took. Soldiers fought not simply because of orders, but because they respected the justice of their leader. Local leaders governed with confidence, knowing their traditions were acknowledged. The whole became stable because its parts were not stripped of their identity. Close your eyes now and listen to the empire at night. From Babylon, the chants of priests echo softly against temple walls. From Jerusalem, the songs of exiles rebuilding rise gently into the starry sky. From the Median hills, flutes play mournful yet peaceful melodies. From Lydia, the faint clink of coins being counted in lamplight. From Susa, the murmur of dozens of tongues weaving together like threads in a single song. These sounds do not clash. They resonate, forming a harmony vast enough to cradle millions. The empire became more than a political entity. It became a sanctuary of difference. A house with many rooms, each room filled with its own customs, yet all protected under the same roof. This house did not suffocate. It allowed breathing. It did not strip. It preserved. It did not erase. It gathered. And so it endured, remembered not only in chronicles but in sacred texts, not only in the accounts of Persians, but in the memories of peoples who had once been enemies. This endurance was not an accident. It was the direct result of Cyrus's vision. He understood that the power to destroy is fleeting, but the power to allow, to protect, to weave together, creates something that lasts. And so the Persian Empire, in its diversity, became not fragile but strong. Its stability came not from uniformity but from unity, not from terror but from respect. As you let these images drift within you, feel the calm rhythm of that unity settling like a soft blanket. See the lamps burning in temples of many gods, their flames distinct yet together illuminating the same night. Smell the spices of distant markets, mingling into a perfume that is neither one thing nor another but all at once. Hear the many voices rising, layered, different, yet woven into harmony beneath the stars. This was the tapestry of cultures and faiths within the Persian Empire, a vision so rare it still whispers across time. And as your breathing slows, as the weight of day drifts from your body, let the thought of this mosaic lull you deeper into rest. The empire of Cyrus, vast and varied, thrived not by silencing difference, but by preserving it. And in that preservation it created peace wide enough to hold nations, gentle enough to soothe even the restless heart. Block 9, the structures of governance. When the dust of conquest had settled, and the banners of Persia waved over lands that stretched from the Aegean shores to the mountains of Central Asia, Cyrus faced a challenge more enduring than any battle: how to govern such immensity. Conquest could win cities, but without order those cities would wither into rebellion. Armies could strike fear, but fear alone could not hold together peoples who spoke in dozens of tongues, prayed to countless gods, and carried with them customs older than memory. For this reason, Cyrus turned his gaze not only to the battlefield, but to the fabric of daily life, to the structures that would allow his empire to breathe as a single body, vast yet united, diverse yet whole. Picture this empire as a living organism, its heart beat in the Persian highlands steady and strong. From that heart flowed great arteries, the roads that stretched across deserts, over mountains, along fertile valleys carrying lifeblood in the form of trade, messages, and movement. Along these arteries galloped couriers, their horses pounding the earth, their satchels filled with clay tablets inscribed in careful cuneiform. With each rider, the thoughts of the king reached outward, and with each return, the pulse of the provinces reached back. The empire was alive, its parts connected by an invisible network of communication, swift and dependable, binding its edges to its center. Governors, known later as satraps, were placed over regions, chosen with care for their loyalty and their capacity to manage. They were not free to rule as they pleased. They were bound by oversight, watched by officials who reported directly to the king. In this way, Cyrus ensured balance, authority distributed but never uncontrolled, power granted but never absolute. Each governor collected tribute, maintained order, supervised works of irrigation and roads, but each knew he stood beneath the shadow of the king's authority, a reminder that while the provinces retained their local life, they were threads woven into a greater cloth. Consider the farmer in Babylon. He wakes before dawn, walking into his fields as the canals shimmer faintly in morning light, water flowing from the Euphrates to nourish his crops. He knows that the soldiers of Persia keep the roads clear of raiders, that his harvest can be sold safely in markets untroubled by chaos. His offering at the temple of Marduk will be accepted as it has always been, his prayers rising in peace, unbroken by the interference of empire. He pays tribute, yes, but that tribute is not the crushing weight of plunder. It is a contribution that maintains the very peace he now enjoys. Now shift your gaze to Lydia, where artisans strike coins from gold, each disc gleaming as it falls from the die. These coins travel quickly along the roads, carried by traders who know that Persia's reach will protect them from theft and violence. In the markets of Sardis, voices rise in bargaining. Aramaic, Greek, Persian, Lydian, a blend of tongues that once clashed but now resonate together. The artisan who hammers gold into delicate jewelry knows that his work will find buyers in distant lands, his skill carried far beyond his city's walls. He too pays his tribute, but it returns to him in the form of security, in the form of open markets that stretch as far as his imagination can wander. Travel next to Jerusalem, where stones are being lifted one by one, set into place with patient hands as the temple rises again after years of exile. Priests offer prayers with voices that tremble in gratitude, their chants echoing against new walls that gleam in sunlight. Families gather, not in despair, but in renewal, their faith restored not by their former captors, but by the decree of Cyrus. Here, the tribute they give flows into roads that allow caravans to pass safely, into the presence of soldiers who guard rather than oppress, into a system that acknowledges their right to worship as they have always worshipped. The empire's structure was not one of uniformity, but of balance. Each province retained its customs, its altars, its languages, but all were tied together by laws that offered predictability where once there had been uncertainty. Scribes recorded harvests, measured taxes, documented disputes, their styluses pressing carefully into clay, their scrolls rolled with precision. Judges sat in shaded courtyards, hearing the voices of peasants and nobles alike, their rulings guided not by whim but by principle. Temples stood as they had before, but now they stood under the protection of Persia, their sacred fires flickering not in secrecy but in confidence. Cyrus's genius lay not only in his conquests but in his restraint. He did not crush the structures of those he conquered, he wove them into his own. Babylonian scribes continued their traditions, Lydian merchants their trade, Jewish priests their worship. Each people was allowed to remain itself, but each was drawn gently into the rhythm of empire. The result was not fragmentation, but stability. not rebellion, but loyalty. At night, the empire rested in silence that was not empty but full. Along the royal road, fires of caravans flickered, merchants whispering in many languages as their animals grazed. In provincial capitals, governors studied reports by lamplight, their minds turning over the details of harvest and tribute. In palaces, scribes arranged clay tablets in neat rows, the memory of the empire pressed into earth itself. And in distant villages, families sat beneath the stars, their lives untroubled by war, their tomorrow steadied by the knowledge that Persia's protection extended even to them. This framework of governance, simple in its beginnings but profound in its vision, carried within it the seeds of endurance. Long after Cyrus was gone, Darius would refine it, formalizing the satrapies, creating systems so advanced that even centuries later they would inspire other empires. But none of it would have been possible without the foundations Cyrus laid. He showed that empire could be more than conquest. It could be administration. It could be fairness. It could be the quiet strength of law. And so the Persian Empire became not just a realm of victories, but a realm of order. A house whose beams were invisible yet strong, whose roof stretched wide enough to shelter millions, whose walls were built not of uniform bricks, but of countless stones, each unique, each necessary. It endured because it was balanced, because it allowed its parts to live, because it was held together not only by might, but by the structures of governance that turned chaos into stability. As you rest within this image, let the slow rhythm of Persia's order lull you deeper into calm. Imagine the endless roads stretching across horizons, the couriers riding swiftly, the markets buzzing with trade, the temples glowing with fire, the judges listening, the scribes recording, the governors ruling, the king watching. All of it moves not with haste, but with steadiness, like the quiet beat of a great heart. This was Cyrus's gift to the world, not only conquest, but structure, not only expansion, but endurance. And in that endurance, the empire itself became a lullaby of order, whispering softly across centuries, reminding us that the truest power is not only the sword, but the hand that builds and sustains. Block 10. The Transition of Kings. The Persian Empire, vast and breathing, had grown from the vision of a single man who was born not in the halls of power, but in the quiet fields of Anshan. Cyrus had taken the threads of many peoples and woven them into a tapestry wide enough to stretch across continents, strong enough to survive storms, gentle enough to let every thread retain its own color. Yet even the greatest of kings, no matter how wide their reach, must one day face the limits of time. The story of empire is not only the story of conquest and governance, but also of succession, of how one life hands its work to another, of how visions endure or fade when the hand that first shaped them is gone. And so, in the long unfolding of Persia's history, the moment arrived when Cyrus's reign approached its close, and the question of who would carry the torch forward began to glow more brightly. Imagine the empire at this moment, not as a battlefield roaring with noise, but as a house filled with quiet anticipation. In Babylon, the market still hummed, the temples still shone with lamps, the canals still carried water beneath starry skies. In Sardis, merchants still counted coins, artisans still hammered gold into jewelry, shepherds still guided their flocks across Lydia's hills. In Jerusalem, stones still rose one upon another as the temple rebuilt itself from ruin into glory. Across the empire, life continued in its calm rhythm, but in the palaces and the minds of courtiers, questions whispered like breezes through corridors. What would happen when Cyrus's steady hand no longer rested upon the empire? Who would guard the canopy when its architect had passed? Cyrus himself, though mortal, seemed larger than life. His presence alone commanded respect, his decisions shaping nations. To imagine a Persia without him felt, to many, as though the sun itself might dim. Yet Cyrus had prepared not only armies and laws, but structures of continuity. He knew that an empire without succession is like a body without heartbeat, a structure doomed to collapse once the first beam is removed. And so, as his reign matured, the framework that had carried Persia's stability began to prepare for a future beyond him. Let your mind linger on this image. The aging king, seated not in triumph but in contemplation, gazing across lands that stretched further than his eyes could see. His beard, once dark, now touched with gray. His body, once unyielding, now slower, yet his spirit still steady, still filled with the calm fire of vision. Around him, advisors spoke softly, courtiers moved cautiously, but Cyrus himself remained tranquil. He had given the empire its foundation. He had shown that unity could exist without erasure, that law could be stronger than cruelty, that respect could bind more tightly than chains. His task had been fulfilled, yet the empire's story was only beginning. In this stillness, the figure of Darius began to rise, though not yet in full. The seeds of his governance had been planted already, in the satrapies Cyrus had envisioned, in the roads Cyrus had built, in the laws Cyrus had established. Darius would later expand them, refine them, turn them into a structure so advanced it would astonish generations. But here, in the twilight of Cyrus's reign, what mattered most was the transition, the gentle passing of a torch, the assurance that the canopy would not collapse when its builder lay in rest. Imagine the empire holding its breath during these years. Along the royal road, couriers still rode, their hooves striking steady rhythms into the earth. In the mountains, villages still lit fires against the cold, their smoke drifting slowly into dawn skies. In the plains, caravans still moved in long lines, their bells ringing faintly, their goods flowing between east and west. Life continued, steady and calm, yet always beneath the surface the awareness lingered. Cyrus was mortal, and time was relentless. And when the king who had spared Babylon, who had freed the exiles, who had respected the gods of every land was gone, who would guide this vast house of nations? The transition of kingship in Persia was not a single moment, but a slow unfolding, like twilight fading into night, like the desert cooling after a long day beneath the sun. It was not marked by sudden collapse, but by careful continuity. Even as Cyrus prepared for his final campaigns, even as he rode once more toward the eastern frontiers, the empire's structures endured, the canopy still wide, the tapestry still strong. And when at last the moment came, when the man whose name had become a beacon across nations fell in battle, and his body was carried home to Pasargadae, his vision did not vanish. It lingered, woven into the roads, the temples, the laws, the memories of millions. Picture Pasargadae, the resting place of Cyrus, a city he himself had built, not as a fortress of pride, but as a garden of peace. His tomb, simple and enduring, rose above fields where water flowed through channels, where trees swayed gently, where the air smelled of earth and fruit. Travelers who came there did not find a monument of arrogance, but a house of rest, a place of silence. The simplicity of the tomb reflected the humility of the man, a king who could have demanded divine worship, but who instead chose to be remembered as the shepherd of his people. And in that humility, his greatness shone even brighter. But the empire could not rest forever in mourning. From the silence of Cyrus's tomb, the voice of continuity called. His successors, Cambyses and then Darius, would take the throne. Cambyses, though fierce, could not carry the vision with the same steadiness. His reign brought both expansion and turmoil, Egypt falling to Persia, but unrest rising within. And so the empire, vast and alive, awaited the figure who would steady it once more. That figure would be Darius, the king who took the skeleton Cyrus had laid and clothed it in flesh, who turned vision into system, who transformed foundation into fortress. Yet before we turn to Darius, let us pause within this transition, this threshold where past and future touched. Imagine the empire as a great house in twilight, lamps glowing in its many rooms, voices speaking softly, children sleeping peacefully, elders praying quietly, merchants counting coins, priests lighting incense, soldiers sharpening swords. The house is vast, yet it is whole, and though its master has passed into silence, the house itself stands firm. This is the legacy of Cyrus, that he built not only for his own life but for the lives that would follow, that his empire was not a castle of sand washed away by time, but a structure strong enough to endure generations. And now, as you rest within this vision, let the calmness of continuity settle upon you. The empire does not collapse. It breathes. The tapestry does not unravel. It holds. The canopy does not tear. It remains stretched wide. Cyrus has gone, but his vision lingers. His order endures. His peace continues. And in that endurance, the empire prepares quietly for Darius, the one who will refine, expand, and solidify, ensuring that Persia's name will echo not only in his age but in ages to come. If this journey through the stillness of transition brings you peace, if the story of kings who built with vision has guided you gently into calm reflection, let your presence here be felt. Leave a quiet trace by liking this passage, by sharing it with others who also seek rest, by offering a comment as one more thread in this tapestry of voices. And if you wish to walk with us further, to follow the story as it unfolds into the reign of Darius, subscribe, so that each night when silence deepens, you may return here and drift once more into the calm rhythm of history. Block 11, The Rise of Darius. The passing of Cyrus was not the end of Persia, but the beginning of a new chapter. His empire, vast and woven with threads of countless cultures, stood steady, even as the voice that had guided it fell silent. Yet silence in empire can never last forever. Power seeks continuity, and the order Cyrus had created needed a guardian. After Cambyses' brief and troubled reign, a new figure emerged from the horizon of history, a man not born to immediate kingship, but one whose name would come to stand beside Cyrus as one of the greatest rulers of the ancient world. This man was Darius. Imagine the empire at the moment of his rise. Restless, stretched wide, its provinces intact but murmuring with uncertainty, its peoples faithful yet watchful, its nobility ambitious and unsettled. Cambyses had carried the armies into Egypt and extended Persia's reach into the sands of the Nile, yet his hand was harsher, his reign more unstable, and whispers of revolt had begun to travel along the roads. The canopy Cyrus had built still held, but storms pressed against its edges. It was in this moment of vulnerability that Darius appeared, not as a conqueror seizing power by sword alone, but as an organizer, a builder, a ruler who would take the foundations left by Cyrus and raise them into structures so enduring that centuries later they would still inspire empires to come. Darius did not begin as a king. He was of noble Persian blood, yes, but he rose through loyalty, through service, through the trust others placed in his discipline and ability. When Cambyses died, the throne stood contested, claimants rising, confusion spreading. It was Darius who seized the moment, who steadied the crown not by accident but by vision, who claimed kingship and then proved himself worthy of it by action. And so the empire shifted from the hands of Cyrus, through the turbulence of Cambyses, into the hands of the one who would be remembered as Darius the Great. Picture him in these early days, not seated in stillness but moving tirelessly across the empire, riding roads built by Cyrus, listening to the reports of governors, watching the flow of tribute, observing the murmurs of unrest. His eyes were sharp, his mind disciplined, his spirit relentless. Where Cyrus had given the vision of tolerance and order, Darius gave the structure that would enforce it. He was not content with vague foundations. He wanted systems, records, divisions, standards that would make the empire not just wide, but efficient. It was Darius who divided the empire into satrapies in full 20 great provinces, each with its own governor, its own treasury, its own military command, but all bound firmly to the crown. Each satrap had authority, but each was balanced by the presence of royal inspectors, the eyes and ears of the king, who traveled constantly, who watched, who listened, who reported directly to Darius. In this way, power was granted but restrained, loyalty rewarded but tested, autonomy allowed but always tethered to the throne. The empire became not only vast but disciplined, a living machine whose parts moved in harmony because they were measured and watched. Imagine now the treasury of Susa, filled with goods from every corner of the empire. Gold from Lydia, grain from Mesopotamia, spices from India, textiles dyed in Phoenician purple, ivory from distant Africa. Couriers rode endlessly along the royal road, carrying not only messages but also detailed reports. How much grain harvested, how many soldiers stationed, how much tribute collected. Nothing escaped Darius's gaze. Nothing remained unmeasured. The empire that Cyrus had planted as a tree was now pruned, watered, and trained into growth by Darius's hand. Yet even in his discipline, Darius did not abandon the principle of tolerance. Temples still stood, priests still prayed, peoples still spoke their own tongues, followed their own customs, remembered their own ancestors. But now, all of this was enfolded within a system that balanced freedom with accountability, difference with loyalty, diversity with order. It was no longer enough for the empire to exist. Under Darius, it was required to function, to produce, to endure. The satrapies became the lungs of this vast body, each inhaling and exhaling wealth, faith, culture, and law. Tribute did not vanish into chaos. It flowed into roads, into armies, into palaces that stood as symbols of unity. The empire's heart beat even stronger now, its veins pumping faster, its pulse steadier. And all of this, all of the immense weight of land stretching across 3 continents, rested in the discipline of Darius, in his relentless demand for structure. Now imagine the people in their daily lives under Darius. The farmer in Mesopotamia still worked his fields, but now his harvest was counted, recorded, taxed with precision. The merchant in Sardis still sold his goods, but now his coins bore the standard of Persia, their weight and value fixed, their trustworthiness assured across thousands of miles. The priest in Babylon still lit incense, but now his temple was catalogued, its endowments listed, its privileges confirmed by royal decree. To the common man, life still carried the calmness first given by Cyrus, but now it carried also the steady rhythm of law, of order, of system. Darius built not only administration, but monuments. His inscriptions carved into stone told of his victories, his right to rule, his dedication to Ahura Mazda, the god he revered. He did not only govern through invisible systems, he proclaimed his authority visibly, etching it into cliffs and palaces so that all who saw would remember. And yet, beneath the grandeur of his words, the strength of his reign was not only in battle or proclamation, but in the invisible web of order he spun across the empire. a web so fine and yet so strong that it held millions together without breaking. As you drift with these images, let the rise of Darius settle upon you like the slow unfurling of dawn after night. Cyrus had built the foundation, Darius built the structure. Cyrus had shown mercy, Darius showed discipline. Cyrus had created unity, Darius enforced stability. Together their visions intertwined, each necessary, each incomplete without the other. And as the empire moved from one to the other, it did not collapse but grew stronger, steadier, more enduring. Breathe slowly now, and imagine the empire as a vast house once again. Its roof stretched wide, its beams reinforced, its walls solid. Within its rooms, peoples of every language continue their lives. Priests pray, merchants trade, farmers labor, children laugh, scribes record. The empire hums with activity, but beneath it all there is order, balance, peace. This is the gift of Darius, to take the dream of Cyrus and give it permanence, to turn vision into system, to make what was fragile into what was lasting. Block 12. The satrapies in detail. The empire of Persia under Darius was like no other the ancient world had ever seen. Cyrus had given it breath and heart. Cambyses had carried it further outward into the sands of Egypt. But it was Darius who gave it structure so vast and so intricate that it could not simply exist. It could endure. His system of satrapies, 20 great provinces stretching across 3 continents, became the framework upon which Persia lived and grew. Each satrapy was more than a political division. It was a world of its own, with landscapes, peoples, faiths, and traditions as distinct as the stars scattered across the night sky. And yet, all of them were bound together into one constellation, each shining in its own way but forming a single pattern. Imagine walking through the empire, moving slowly, province by province, like drifting across an endless mosaic. Begin in Lydia, where the satrap presided over cities whose markets rang with the sound of coins, the world's first minted in gold, gleaming in sunlight as merchants from Greece, Phoenicia, and beyond bargained loudly in many tongues. Here the smell of roasted meat mingled with the sharp tang of wine, amphorae stacked in warehouses, the voices of sailors drifting from harbors. The satrap of Lydia did not erase this life, but ordered it, collecting tribute, guarding roads, ensuring that trade continued not in fear, but in confidence. Now cross eastward into Babylon, the jewel of Mesopotamia. Its ziggurats rose against the horizon, temples alive with offerings, canals flowing steadily between fields of grain. Priests in fine linen lifted chants to Marduk, their rituals unchanged even under Persian oversight. The satrap here recorded harvests carefully, counted stores of grain, tallied the herds grazing across the plains. Babylon had once been a kingdom proud enough to challenge empires, but under Persia it became a province, vital and vibrant. Its wealth preserved, its voice still strong, its dignity maintained. The satrap kept peace not by suppressing, but by balancing, allowing the city to thrive while binding it to the larger order of the empire. Travel farther, to Egypt, newly drawn under the Persian crown. Here the Nile wound its eternal course, its floods nourishing fields as it had for millennia. Farmers bent to the earth with hands darkened by soil, planting wheat and barley in rhythms unchanged from the days of the pharaohs. Temples to Ra and Osiris still glowed with incense, their columns painted in colors that dazzled even Persian eyes. The satrap of Egypt walked carefully here, knowing he ruled a land with pride as ancient as Babylon, a land whose priests carried secrets older than Persia itself. And yet, Darius's system held. Taxes were recorded, armies stationed, local customs respected, tribute flowing northward into the empire's treasury, while Egypt continued its eternal rituals under a foreign yet strangely respectful crown. Then to Media, the land of mountains and pastures, where shepherds guided flocks across slopes while warriors trained in valleys. Here the satrap ruled over tribes proud of their independence, but loyal in spirit, their strength tied closely to Persia's own. In their altars, flames still burned to ancient gods, their songs echoing across hills at dusk. The satrap here acted not as conqueror, but as overseer, a steady presence ensuring that order endured without crushing the wild spirit of the land. Onward to the satrapies of the east, Bactria, Sogdiana, lands of riders and traders where the silk of distant China first touched Persian roads. Caravans stretched like rivers across the plains, camels groaning beneath their loads, merchants haggling at way stations. The satraps of these distant lands did not silence the voices of nomads or the customs of horsemen. They instead harnessed their movement, ensuring tribute reached the crown while letting the pulse of trade enrich both local life and imperial treasury. Each satrapy had its rhythm, each sang its own song, yet all were tuned to the same key: loyalty to the king, tribute to the treasury, stability to the roads. And all of it was watched by the eyes and ears of the king, inspectors who traveled silently, unseen yet always present, ensuring no satrap grew too powerful, no region drifted from the empire's harmony. It was a system both flexible and firm, a web woven so wide that even the winds of rebellion could not easily tear it apart. Picture the empire at night, its satrapies glowing like lamps scattered across a vast darkness. In Babylon, torches flickered along canals. In Susa, lamps glowed against palace walls. In Sardis, firelight danced from ships anchored in harbors. In Bactria, campfires of caravans burned beneath open stars. Each flame separate, each flame distinct, but all part of the same constellation, all shining under the same sky of Persia. For the common people, life within the satrapies was not marked by the presence of empire as oppression, but by its steadiness. The farmer knew his fields would not be stolen. The merchant knew his caravan would not be ambushed. The priest knew his temple would not be razed. They lived their lives within the rhythm of their ancestors, yet with a new layer of stability laid gently above them. Tribute was given, yes, but peace was received, and in that exchange, loyalty was secured. This was the brilliance of Darius's satrapies, that they did not erase the identity of provinces, but preserved them, while binding them together into a structure vast enough to span the known world. The satrapies were not prisons, but provinces, not shackles but pillars, each bearing weight, each necessary, each contributing to the balance of the whole. As you let this vision drift into you, breathe with the slow rhythm of the empire. See the satrapies not as fragments, but as stars, each glowing, each distinct, yet all woven into the same pattern of night. Feel the steadiness of roads stretching across deserts, the calmness of soldiers watching silently, the quiet order of scribes pressing styluses into clay, the peace of temples glowing with sacred fire. The empire breathes as one because the satrapies breathe as many, and in that paradox lies its strength. This is the gift of Darius, to have taken Cyrus's vision and given it permanence through system, through detail, through the satrapies that transformed diversity into endurance. And as you drift deeper into calm, let the image of this empire, wide, strong, and yet gentle, settle upon you like a vast canopy stretched across the night, holding within it not silence, but harmony. Block 13, the Royal Roads. The Empire of Persia under Darius was not only a realm of satrapies and treasuries, of governors and priests, of temples and tribute. It was also an empire of movement, of roads that cut across deserts and mountains, binding together lands so wide that without them, the whole would have fallen into silence and separation. More than armies, more than decrees, more than the weight of gold in its treasuries, it was the network of roads, the great royal roads, that made Persia not merely an expanse of territory, but a living organism, each province connected to the heart, each heartbeat reaching swiftly across the body. Picture one of these roads stretching before you, straight and unbroken across the horizon, its surface pressed firm by countless feet and hooves, its edges marked by stations where travelers could rest, where fresh horses waited for the couriers of the king. Along this path, messages flew faster than ever before in human history. A command written in Susa could reach Sardis in days, not weeks. News of rebellion could travel to the king before it grew too strong. Tribute could be accounted for, soldiers directed, governors instructed. The roads were not mere paths of stone and dust. They were the veins of empire, carrying lifeblood from heart to limb, from limb to heart. Imagine standing by the side of the royal road at dawn. The air is still cool, the horizon glowing faintly with the first light of day. From the east, you hear the steady pounding of hooves. A courier approaches, his horse lathered with sweat, his eyes fixed on the distance ahead. He does not pause. He does not falter. At the next station, he will hand his satchel to another rider, who will mount a fresh horse and continue without delay. And so the message, written on clay or parchment, flies across the empire faster than wind, carried not by one man but by many, each bound by duty to the king. This was the system that made Persia not only vast but immediate, not only wide but near. The royal roads were not only for messengers. Caravans of merchants moved along them, camels groaning under the weight of silks and spices, donkeys laden with grain and oil, oxen pulling carts of stone and timber. Soldiers marched in disciplined lines, their armor gleaming beneath the sun, their steps shaking dust into the air. Pilgrims walked slowly, carrying offerings to temples far away. Families moved from one city to another, drawn by the promise of safety along the route. At night, campfires flickered on either side of the road, the hum of voices rising in many tongues, all sheltered by the unseen presence of Persia's law. Each road was more than earth and stone. It was marked by milestones, measured carefully so that distances were known, so that journeys could be counted not in vague days but in precise stretches. Inns and stations rose at intervals, places where couriers could rest, where merchants could find water, where soldiers could regroup. The empire breathed along these lines, its rhythm steady, its pulse unbroken. Without them, the satrapies would have been distant stars, shining alone in darkness. With them, they became a constellation, each light connected, each part of the same sky. Now, let your imagination drift across the vast span of the royal road that stretched from Sardis in the west to Susa in the east, more than 2,500 kilometers of connection. Imagine walking its length, each step carrying you through different worlds. From the Aegean coast, where ships rocked gently in harbors, through the valleys of Anatolia, where fields ripened in the sun, past mountains where snow still lingered on distant peaks, into Mesopotamia, where rivers flowed wide and slow, through deserts where the horizon shimmered in heat, into the heartlands of Persia where palaces rose against open skies. Each land different, each tongue unique, each god distinct, and yet all tied together by the same path, the same road, the same empire. Consider the silence of the road at night. The stars blaze overhead, countless and cold, their light stretching across eternity. The road lies quiet, yet not abandoned, For somewhere in the distance, the sound of hooves approaches, a courier riding tirelessly through the dark, his lamp swinging, his shadow flickering on the earth. The message he carries may be no more than a list of tribute, or it may be the command of the king himself. But whatever it is, it will not be delayed. It will not falter, for the road ensures its passage. The road guarantees its arrival. The royal roads were more than tools of governance. They were symbols of connection, of unity, of the empire's ability to hold together what otherwise would have drifted apart. Along them flowed not only orders and wealth, but culture, knowledge, and faith. A hymn sung in one land could be heard in another, carried by travelers. A technique of weaving learned in Lydia could appear in Susa. A recipe of spices from India could delight palaces in Babylon. The roads did not only bind politically, they bound spiritually, culturally, humanly. As you rest in this image, feel the calm rhythm of the road beneath your feet, stretching endlessly, steady and sure. Hear the quiet steps of travelers, the slow creak of carts, the gentle murmur of merchants bargaining at way stations, the distant thunder of hooves as couriers ride into the horizon. See the lamps of stations glowing faintly at night, their flames like stars fall into earth, guiding the way. Smell the mingled scents of grain, oil, incense, and spice carried along the wind. The royal roads were not only paths, they were lifelines, the breath of empire, the quiet order stretched across the earth. And as your breathing slows, as you drift deeper into calm, let the vision of these roads become a lullaby. They stretch endlessly, yet they are steady. They connect countless lives, yet they do so silently. They remind us that the greatest empires are not held by swords alone, but by the threads of connection, by the quiet strength of roads that bind together what distance would otherwise divide. This was Darius's gift, to make Persia not only vast, but near, not only wide, but one. Block 14, the wealth of the empire. The empire of Persia did not shine only in its roads or its armies, nor only in the satrapies that stretched across lands as wide as imagination itself. It also shone in the quiet hum of wealth that flowed steadily into its heart, a wealth not gathered by plunder and destruction, but by the measured rhythm of tribute, by the patient harvest of abundance, by the system of order that turned diversity into treasure. Under Darius, this wealth became more than scattered riches. It became the lifeblood of empire, flowing like rivers from every province into the treasury of the king, collected, recorded, balanced, and then sent outward again to nourish the whole. Imagine walking through the great treasury at Susa. The air is cool within its walls, the floor hard beneath your feet, and before your eyes stretch piles of tribute that dazzle in their variety. From Lydia, bars of gold and silver gleam, stamped with marks of purity. From Babylon, jars of grain are stacked high, their tops sealed with clay, alongside baskets of dates that give off a sweet fragrance. From Egypt, linen finer than spider's silk lies folded in neat piles, while amphorae filled with wine and oil stand upright in rows like soldiers at attention. From India, spices flow in bright colors, turmeric glowing yellow, cinnamon curling in fragrant coils, pepper as dark as night. From Arabia, frankincense and myrrh rise in clouds of perfume, their smoke drifting lazily into the air. From the highlands, horses are led into stables, their manes shining, their muscles strong. Each item speaks of a land, a people, a tradition. Yet here in the treasury they stand together, no longer separate but united as the wealth of Persia. The system that gathered this wealth was not chaos but order. Each satrapy knew its tribute, Babylon its grain, Lydia its gold, Egypt its linen, Media its horses, India its spices. The satraps, disciplined by oversight, ensured the flow did not falter. Scribes recorded each offering, pressing numbers into clay, writing names upon parchment, arranging scrolls in neat rows upon shelves. Inspectors checked their work, making certain no hand withheld, no measure cheated. And above them all, the gaze of the king stretched, watching, weighing, ensuring that the flow continued. The empire did not starve its provinces. It asked from them what they could give, and in return it offered protection, order, peace. Now imagine the markets that thrived because of this wealth. In Sardis, coins rang as they struck wooden counters, merchants haggling loudly beneath awnings of dyed cloth. In Babylon, the air shimmered with heat as sellers called out prices for baskets of figs, dates, barley, and fish fresh from the river. In Memphis, the smell of roasted geese mingled with the cool fragrance of lotus flowers sold by women carrying bundles on their heads. In Bactria, caravans loaded with silk spilled into markets where perfumes and dyes dazzled the senses. Each market carried its local flavor, its own music of life, but all of them were tied together by the same roads, the same soldiers, the same law. Darius understood that wealth without order is like water poured upon sand. It vanishes. But wealth gathered with system is like water guided by channels. It nourishes fields, it brings growth. And so he created standards, weights and measures fixed, coins minted in gold and silver, their values guaranteed. A merchant in Lydia could sell goods in Babylon without fear of being cheated. A farmer in Media could trade his grain for Egyptian linen and know the exchange was fair. The empire itself became a vast marketplace, stretching from the Aegean to the Indus, where countless goods moved like currents in a single sea. Picture now the great palaces built with this wealth. In Susa, columns rose high, carved with figures of lions and bulls, their capitals gleaming in the sun. Walls were painted with colors that caught the eye, floors polished smooth, gardens planted with trees that gave both shade and fruit. Water flowed through channels carrying coolness into courtyards where courtiers walked in silence, their robes trailing softly. In Persepolis, stairways wide enough for processions rose toward halls where tribute was displayed, where the presence of empire itself was made visible in stone. And yet, these palaces were not only symbols of power, they were symbols of the unity that made such power possible. Each block of stone, each beam of cedar, each panel of gold leaf spoke of lands far away, of peoples whose labor and tribute had made them possible. The wealth of Persia was not only in material goods, it was in the stability that allowed cultures to flourish. Artists carved in stone, scribes copied sacred texts, priests conducted rituals, farmers harvested grain without fear of sudden raids. Knowledge flowed as freely as gold. Astronomy from Babylon, medicine from Egypt, mathematics from India, philosophy from Greece. The empire did not hoard these treasures. It let them mingle, let them travel, let them enrich one another. And so the wealth of Persia was not only counted in coins, but in wisdom, in stories, in traditions preserved and shared. At night, when the markets quieted and the palaces dimmed, the wealth of the empire did not vanish. It rested. In treasuries, gold glowed softly by lamplight. Spices gave off faint fragrances. Scrolls rustled gently as scribes stacked them. In villages, families gathered around simple meals, content in the peace that wealth had purchased. In temples, offerings burned, their smoke rising as prayers of gratitude. Across the empire, the silence of night was not the silence of poverty, but the silence of abundance sleeping, waiting to awaken with the sun. As you drift deeper into this vision, let the calmness of Persia's wealth soothe you. See the rows of amphorae, the piles of gold, the stacks of grain, the caravans moving slowly beneath stars. Hear the soft clink of coins, the murmur of merchants, the scratch of scribes recording numbers. Smell the spices, the incense, the oil. Feel the steadiness of order, the peace that comes from knowing tomorrow will bring not uncertainty, but provision. The wealth of the empire was not a fleeting treasure stolen in war. It was a steady river, flowing calmly, nourishing lands, binding peoples, sustaining life. And as your breathing slows, let this river carry you into rest. Let the image of Persia's abundance become a lullaby, vast, steady, enduring, a wealth not only of gold and grain, but of harmony, order, and peace. This was the wealth of the empire under Darius, and it whispered not of greed but of stability, not of vanity but of endurance. Block 15. The Palaces and the Art of Persia. The wealth of Persia, drawn from satrapies and markets, from tribute and trade, did not vanish into the darkness of treasuries. It was given form in stone and wood, in columns that reached skyward, in walls painted with colors that caught the light of the sun, in gardens watered with channels that made the earth bloom. Darius and his successors raised palaces not only as places of residence, but as symbols of unity, as visible reminders that the empire was more than a collection of lands. It was a whole greater than the sum of its parts. The palaces of Susa and Persepolis became the embodiment of Persia itself, their stones silent yet eloquent, their carvings whispering of power, harmony, and endurance. Imagine entering the palace at Susa at dawn. The air is still cool, shadows stretching long across the ground. Before you rise columns tall and slender, carved with capitals shaped like bulls and lions, their forms both protective and decorative. The stone beneath your feet is polished smooth, cool to the touch, its surface reflecting faint traces of light. Walls around you gleam with glazed tiles, painted in blues and yellows, images of archers standing in procession, their bows held calmly, their faces serene. The palace is not a fortress bristling with violence, but a space of harmony, a place where order itself seems to have been carved into stone. Now picture Persepolis, rising from the plain like a vision. Wide stairways climb gently upward, each step broad enough for processions, for entire delegations carrying tribute from the corners of the empire. Along the stairways are reliefs carved with care, showing Medes in flowing robes, Elamites carrying vessels, Lydians bearing cups of gold, Indians bringing baskets of spices, Ethiopians leading animals. Each figure distinct, each culture preserved, yet all carved into the same wall, all walking toward the same throne. The stone itself becomes a record of the empire's unity, a silent song of diversity woven together. Inside the palaces, halls stretched wide, their ceilings supported by forests of columns, each carved with patterns that caught the eye, each standing as though holding the sky itself. Floors shone with polished stone, rugs woven with intricate designs, softening the steps of courtiers. On the walls hung tapestries dyed in rich colors, their threads carrying stories from distant satrapies. In the gardens, trees brought from many lands grew side by side. Cedars from Lebanon, cypresses from Persia, fruit trees from Media. Water flowed through channels cut with precision, its sound soft and calming, its presence turning dry earth into paradise. These palaces were not only symbols of wealth, they were symbols of vision. They embodied the principle that had guided Persia from Cyrus to Darius, that unity was not the erasure of difference, but the bringing together of many into one. Each relief, each column, each garden tree spoke of provinces far away. Yet here in the palace they stood side by side, no longer distant, no longer separate, but part of a whole. The palace was Persia in miniature, a visible, tangible representation of what the empire was meant to be. And yet, for all their grandeur, These spaces were not oppressive. They did not crush the visitor with weight, but lifted the spirit with harmony. The carvings did not depict slaves in chains, but subjects bearing gifts with dignity. The gardens did not exclude the common man, for they were symbols of paradise open to the imagination of all. The art of Persia spoke not only of power, but of balance, not only of authority, but of respect. Imagine the palaces at night. Torches flicker along the walls, their light glinting off glazed tiles, making the archers seem to move, their bows ready yet at rest. The sound of water flowing through channels is louder in the stillness, its murmur soothing, almost like a lullaby. Courtiers move quietly through the halls, their robes brushing softly against the floor. Musicians play low melodies on strings and flutes, their notes echoing against stone. The stars shine overhead, mirrored in pools within the gardens, so that it seems as if the heavens themselves have descended into the palace grounds. The art of Persia was not confined to palaces. It flowed into the objects of daily life, into pottery painted with intricate designs, into jewelry hammered from gold and silver, into textiles woven with care. But the palaces stood as the greatest canvas, the place where all the threads of empire were brought together and displayed. They were not only homes for kings, they were homes for the idea of empire itself. As you let these images unfold within you, breathe with the rhythm of the palaces. Feel the coolness of polished stone beneath your feet. See the columns rising like trees toward the sky. Hear the murmur of water flowing. Smell the mingling of incense and flowers. Taste the sweetness of fruits grown in palace gardens. Let the harmony of these spaces lull you into rest, for the palaces of Persia were not only symbols of power, but symbols of peace, sanctuaries where the empire could see itself reflected, where the idea of unity could be touched and felt. And as you drift deeper into calm, let the memory of these palaces become your lullaby. They stand still, silent, enduring, their stones whispering across centuries that true greatness lies not in destruction, but in creation, not in erasure, but in harmony, not in cruelty, but in balance. The art of Persia endures because it was not the art of arrogance, but the art of unity, carved into stone, planted in gardens, whispered in water, glowing still in the silence of night. Block 16, Faith and the Sacred Order. The Persian Empire, wide as the horizon and diverse as the stars scattered across the night sky, did not live by laws and tribute alone. Beneath its roads and palaces, beneath its markets and satrapies, there flowed something deeper, something more enduring than wealth or stone. Faith. For men and women across the empire, life was woven not only of trade and harvest, but of prayer and ritual, of shrines and temples, of fires lit and incense rising. And under Darius, religion did not wither under the shadow of empire. It breathed freely, given space to flourish, bound together not by uniformity, but by respect and protection. Picture the empire at dawn, the sun just cresting over mountains, rivers, and plains. In Babylon, priests stand before Marduk's temple, their linen robes glowing faintly in morning light, voices rising in deep chants as incense curls upward into the air. In Jerusalem, Jewish families gather near the stones of their rebuilt temple, psalms whispered as offerings are prepared. In Egypt, priests of Ra lift their hands to the sun itself, golden rays warming the columns of temples, painted in vivid colors. In the mountains of Media, flames are tended on open altars, their flicker steady in the wind, offerings of milk poured carefully into the fire. Each act distinct, each rooted in traditions older than Persia itself, and yet all unfolding at the same hour beneath the same empire. Darius, though devoted to Ahura Mazda, the supreme god of the Persians, did not demand the silence of other gods. Instead, His rule reflected the principle first lived by Cyrus, that strength comes not from erasing faiths, but from honoring them. He carved inscriptions declaring his devotion to Ahura Mazda, proclaiming that his victories and authority came by divine favor, yet he allowed the temples of conquered peoples to stand, their rituals unbroken, their priests unchained. His god was honored, but so too were the gods of Babylon, of Egypt, of Greece, of countless lands drawn under Persia's canopy. Imagine the festivals that filled the empire during these years. In Babylon, great processions wound through the streets, statues of gods carried upon platforms, drums beating, trumpets sounding, incense clouding the air. Children ran at the edges of crowds, laughter mingling with the solemnity of chants. In Egypt, temples glowed with torches as priests reenacted the stories of gods traveling through the underworld, their voices echoing through stone halls carved with hieroglyphs. In Media, communities gathered around fire altars, their faces lit by flickering flames, their prayers whispered into the night wind. Each faith carried its own beauty, its own mystery, yet all were allowed to rise together, like voices in a choir that did not sing the same notes, but created harmony nonetheless. The empire's respect for religion was not merely tolerance, it was strategy, it was wisdom, it was the recognition that the soul of a people cannot be ruled by force, but only by reverence. By allowing each faith to live, Darius ensured that loyalty flowed not only from fear, but from gratitude. The Jewish people remembered him as one chosen to fulfill divine purpose. The Babylonians honored him for protecting their shrines. The Egyptians accepted him as pharaoh, even as they whispered prayers to their own gods. The empire did not collapse under the weight of so many faiths. It thrived because each was allowed to breathe, to shine, to live within the shelter of law. Consider the daily rituals of ordinary life. In a small village in Media, a family gathers at dawn to light a fire in honor of the divine. The flames flickering softly in the cool air, prayers murmured as bread is broken and milk poured into the embers. In Babylon, a farmer pauses at the edge of his field to lift a handful of soil, offering thanks to the gods who give fertility to the earth. In Jerusalem, a mother teaches her child a psalm, the words spoken slowly, carefully, their rhythm becoming part of the child's memory. In Egypt, a fisherman whispers a prayer to the river before casting his net, trusting the Nile to provide as it has for centuries. These acts, small and countless, carried the empire as surely as armies and governors did. And yet, above all, the figure of Ahura Mazda loomed in the devotion of Darius. On cliffs and monuments he carved his testimony, that his rule was by the will of the supreme God, that falsehood and chaos were enemies, that truth and order were divine. In his eyes, kingship was not merely power, it was stewardship, responsibility, sacred trust. And though he honored the faiths of others, his inscriptions reveal his heart, that he saw himself not only as king of men, but as servant of the divine, placed upon the throne to bring order to a world prone to disorder. At night, the empire became a temple in itself. Fires burned on altars, their glow mirrored in the stars above. The air carried the scent of incense, of roasted offerings, of flowers placed upon shrines. Voices whispered prayers in countless tongues, but all carried upward into the same silence of the heavens. The empire, vast and diverse, rested not only in law and wealth, but in faith, in the sacred order that gave meaning to harvests and journeys, to battles and peace, to life itself. As you drift into this vision, feel the calm rhythm of sacred order settling over you. Imagine the glow of lamps in temples, the murmur of chants, the flicker of fire, the fragrance of incense. Picture people of every land bowing, singing, praying, offering, their acts unique yet all flowing into the same great river of devotion. This was Persia under Darius, not only a kingdom of roads and satrapies, but a kingdom of faiths, bound not by erasure but by reverence, not by silence but by harmony. And as your breathing slows, let this river of devotion carry you deeper into rest. For the empire's true strength lay not only in its armies or its gold, but in its respect for the sacred, in its willingness to let men and women honor the divine in their own ways. This is the lullaby of Persia's faith, quiet, steady, enduring, whispering across time that empires may crumble, but reverence endures, and harmony of spirit is the strongest bond of all. Block 17, the army of Persia. The Persian Empire, wide as the horizon, needed more than laws, more than satraps, more than roads and treasuries to endure. Beneath its canopy of cultures and faiths, it required a force that could defend its borders, guard its roads, and remind all who lived within that peace was not fragile but protected. This force was the Persian army, disciplined, vast, and unlike anything the ancient world had yet seen. Under Darius, the army became not only a tool of conquest, but a pillar of order, a silent presence that allowed markets to flourish, temples to remain unbroken, and villages to sleep in calmness beneath the stars. Imagine the army not as a swarm of chaos, but as an ocean of order. Each soldier a wave moving in rhythm, each division a tide rising and falling in unison. At its heart stood the immortals, 10,000 soldiers chosen for skill, loyalty, and discipline. Their name came not only from their prowess, but from the system that ensured their number never diminished. When one fell, another immediately took his place, so that the line never wavered, so that the host seemed eternal. Picture them on the march, rows of shields gleaming in the sun, spears pointed upward like a forest of iron, robes dyed richly, their steps striking the ground with steady rhythm. They were not wild raiders, but living symbols of permanence, of strength that did not falter. Yet the army was more than the immortals. From every satrapy, soldiers came, each bringing their own weapons, their own customs, their own strength. From the plains came horsemen swift as wind, their arrows flying before enemies could even draw near. From the mountains came warriors hardened by stone and snow, their axes sharp, their courage steady. From the deserts came troops accustomed to heat and thirst, their endurance unmatched. From the rivers came sailors, guiding boats across waters wide and narrow, each group distinct, each carrying the spirit of its homeland, and yet all bound together under the same standard, the same command, the same king. The army did not exist only to fight wars. Its presence along the royal roads was a shield for merchants, its watch at city gates a comfort for villagers. Soldiers stood at stations, their armor catching torchlight, their quiet vigilance ensuring that caravans could move without fear, that tribute could reach treasuries, that messages could arrive without delay. They were not only warriors, they were guardians of stability, pillars holding up the canopy so that all beneath could live without terror. Picture the camps at night, set up along roads or upon plains. Fires burn in neat rows, soldiers sitting quietly, polishing weapons, speaking in low voices, eating simple meals of bread and dates. Horses stamp the earth softly, their harnesses gleaming faintly in the firelight. Above, the stars stretch vast, mirrored in the stillness of water carried in jars. The silence is not empty. It is filled with calm strength, with the assurance that even in the dark, the empire is protected, its edges guarded, its heart safe. The army's discipline was its true power. Battles might be won by strength or chance, but order won empires. Soldiers drilled, trained, marched, their movements practiced until they became second nature. Generals listened not only to courage, but to strategy, their minds shaping the flow of forces as carefully as scribes shaped words upon clay. And above them, the king himself embodied not recklessness, but steadiness, his commands carrying the weight of divine sanction, his authority both earthly and sacred. And yet the army was not a force of senseless cruelty. Where Cyrus had shown mercy, Darius too preserved the principle that victory did not always require destruction. Cities that surrendered were spared, peoples that submitted were protected. The army enforced order, but it also carried the empire's message, that loyalty brought peace, that rebellion brought discipline. It was a force both feared and trusted, both a sword and a shield. Imagine now the great musters, when soldiers from across the empire gathered together in one place, the plain filled with tents stretching as far as the eye could see, banners of many colors fluttering in the wind, the sound of countless voices mingling. There were horsemen from Bactria, spearmen from Media, archers from Scythia, sailors from Phoenicia, warriors from Egypt. Each spoke a different tongue, yet when the signal sounded, they moved as one, their diversity shaped into unity, their many strengths woven into one unstoppable force. To stand upon a hill and look down upon such a gathering was to see the empire made flesh, its satrapies transformed into soldiers, its unity given shape in the rhythm of marching feet. At night, when the fires burned low and soldiers drifted into sleep, the army itself seemed to rest as a single body. The sound of breathing rose and fell like waves upon the sea, steady, calm, unbroken. The stars above shone silently, their light touching shields stacked in neat rows, spears leaning against tents, horses standing still. The silence was deep, not fragile but strong. The silence of strength at rest, of power held steady, of guardianship unbroken. As you let this image settle within you, feel the calm assurance of protection. The army of Persia was not chaos but order, not terror but stability, not only a force of conquest but a presence that allowed life itself to flourish. Villages slept because soldiers watched. Markets thrived because roads were guarded. Faiths endured because temples were protected. The army was the quiet strength beneath the canopy, the steady pulse that kept the empire alive. And as your breathing slows, let the rhythm of marching feet become your lullaby. Imagine the steady steps, the quiet discipline, the strength held in silence. The army of Persia whispers across time that true power is not only in battle, but in the calm presence that allows peace to endure. It was not merely a sword, but a shield, and in its shadow the empire rested, vast, secure, enduring. Block 18, the daily life of the empire. The Persian Empire, so vast in reach and so intricate in its systems of order, was not built only on kings and satraps, on treasuries and armies. Beneath all of these towering structures flowed the quiet rhythm of daily life, the countless ordinary acts of farmers, artisans, merchants, priests, mothers, fathers, children. Acts so small they seldom appear in chronicles, yet so essential that without them, the empire would have been no more than empty stone. To understand Persia's greatness, one must not look only at the palaces of Susa or Persepolis, or at the immortals on parade, but at the hum of villages at dawn, the bustle of markets at noon, the silence of households at night. It was here, in the quiet constancy of ordinary people, that the empire truly lived. Picture a village in the shadow of the Zagros Mountains. Dawn is breaking, the sky still painted in hues of rose and pale gold. A farmer rises from his bed of woven mats, the cool air carrying the faint smell of smoke from the fire that burned through the night. He steps into the courtyard where his wife has already prepared bread, its crust crisp, its warmth comforting. Their children stir, rubbing sleep from their eyes, stretching before the day begins. Soon the farmer takes his tools, worn smooth by years of use, and walks into the fields where canals glisten with flowing water. The earth is dark, fertile, ready. He bends, plants, waters, and as the sun climbs higher, his sweat falls into the soil like another offering. Around him other farmers work, their voices rising in song, their laughter echoing across the valley. Their lives are simple, but they are steady, and in their steadiness the empire finds its root. Now walk into a city, Babylon perhaps, or Sardis or Memphis, and let the scene unfold. The streets are alive with movement. Merchants arrange their stalls, bolts of cloth dyed deep red, baskets of dates piled high, amphorae of oil glistening in the sun. The air is thick with scents, the sharpness of garlic, the sweetness of figs, the earthy fragrance of grain. Buyers haggle, voices rising and falling, hands gesturing wildly, children darting between stalls with small coins clutched in their fists. Somewhere a musician plays a flute, his melody weaving through the noise, a reminder that even amid commerce, beauty endures. At the edge of the market, a scribe sits cross-legged, stylus in hand, writing on a clay tablet, recording transactions for those who cannot write themselves. Life hums in every corner, and though the faces are countless, each with its own story, together they create the music of the empire. In the temples, priests tend fires and idols, their rituals steady as the seasons. Offerings of bread and wine, of milk and incense, of grain and fruit are laid before altars. The faithful bow their heads, whispering prayers, their voices blending into a murmur that seems to rise with the smoke into the heavens. In Babylon, the chants to Marduk echo from ziggurats that tower above the city. In Jerusalem, psalms are sung beside stones newly set in the rebuilt temple. In Egypt, hymns to Ra accompany the rising of the sun, the columns of temples painted in colors that glow like fire. Each act is different, each tongue unique, yet all are united by reverence, by the need to place life within the frame of the sacred. At midday, the empire rests in its own way. Farmers pause beneath trees, sharing bread and water, laughing as they wipe the sweat from their brows. Merchants sit in the shade of awnings, sipping wine, watching the flow of buyers slow as the sun burns high. Children nap in the corners of courtyards, their small bodies curled, their breath steady. In palaces, courtiers move softly through shadowed halls, their sandals whispering against polished stone, their voices low, their gestures precise. Everywhere life bends to the rhythm of heat and time, slowing, resting, preparing for the evening. When the sun begins to sink, the empire awakens again. In villages, families gather in courtyards, eating meals of bread, cheese, dates, lentils, their conversations weaving together stories of the day. In cities, torches are lit, markets close, but taverns fill with voices. The sound of dice rolling on wooden tables, of cups clinking, of laughter spilling into the night air. Musicians play in small squares, their melodies soft, their rhythms slow, guiding bodies into dance, guiding hearts into calmness. Temples glow with lamps, their flames steady, their priests watching silently as prayers continue long after the markets have stilled. And then comes night, when the empire falls into a deeper silence. In villages, families lie down upon mats, their bodies weary but their spirits calm, the air filled with the faint crackle of fires, with the sound of wind moving through reeds. In cities, the noise fades, the streets empty, dogs wander quietly, and only the stars keep watch above. In palaces, guards stand at their posts, torches flickering, their eyes scanning the darkness. Across the empire, from the Nile to the Indus, from the Aegean to the mountains of Central Asia, millions rest. Their breathing rises and falls, steady as waves upon a shore. And in that breathing, the empire itself breathes, alive not in monuments alone, but in the simple constancy of daily life. As you let these images unfold within you, let the rhythm of ordinary life calm your own. See the farmer bending to the soil, the merchant arranging his stall, the priest lighting a lamp, the child playing in a courtyard, the mother singing softly as she rocks her infant to sleep. Hear the sounds of markets, of songs, of prayers, of silence. Smell the bread baking, the incense burning, the grain harvested, the flowers blooming. Feel the steady peace of lives unbroken by war, lives carried gently within the shelter of Persia's order. And as your breathing slows, let this vision of daily life become your lullaby. The empire does not roar in this moment. It hums quietly, like a song sung by millions, each voice small, but together vast, steady, enduring. This is the heart of Persia, not only in kings and palaces, not only in armies and roads, but in the daily lives of its people, who woke and worked, prayed and rested, lived and loved beneath the wide canopy of empire. Block 19, the empire at rest. The Persian Empire, in all its vastness, in all its movement, in all its complexity of satraps and soldiers, merchants and priests, had within it a rhythm that was not only of labor, of tribute, of armies on the march, of messengers racing along the royal roads. Beneath all of this, there was also a deeper rhythm, one that spoke not of activity, but of stillness, not of conquest, but of rest. To see the empire truly, one must also see it not in the blaze of day, but in the quiet of night, when fires burned low, when voices softened, when even the vast machinery of kings and councils seemed to pause, and the empire exhaled as though all creation had chosen to sleep together. Picture the cities of Persia as twilight falls. Babylon, with its ziggurats and canals, its markets and temples, glows faintly as torches flicker along the riverbanks. The chatter of merchants fades, the clatter of carts grows distant, the songs of priests settle into whispers. In Persepolis, the stairways carved with processions of stone seem almost alive in the dim light. Yet no footsteps echo upon them now. Only the sigh of wind moving between columns. In Susa, the treasury doors are closed, the gleam of gold hidden in darkness, the scribes resting their weary hands, the clay tablets stacked silently in corners. The empire's pulse slows, its heartbeat gentle, steady, as though it too has stretched itself upon a mat to rest. Now move outward, into the villages. In Media, shepherds gather their flocks into enclosures, their silhouettes dark against the fading sky. Fires are lit in courtyards, their smoke drifting upward in thin columns, carrying with them the smell of bread baking, of lentils simmering, of herbs drying in the warmth. Families sit close, eating slowly, their voices soft, their laughter low. And when the meal is done, they lie down together, their heads upon woven mats, their children's breaths rising and falling in rhythm with their own. The stars above look down not upon war, not upon turmoil, but upon rest, upon peace. Imagine the roads of the empire, so often alive with couriers and caravans now silent. The stones of the royal road are cool beneath the night air, their dust unstirred, their milestones glowing faintly in starlight. At way stations, horses stand tethered, shifting quietly, their ears flicking at the sound of insects. Couriers sleep lightly, their satchels resting beside them, their dreams carrying them forward even as their bodies pause. The silence of the roads is not emptiness, but calmness. A pause before dawn will once again fill them with life. Even the army, that ocean of discipline, rests now. In their camp, soldiers lie in neat rows, their armor set aside, their weapons stacked carefully, their bodies still. Fires burn low, casting gentle glows upon tents, upon shields, upon the faces of men who by day embody strength, but by night surrender to the same vulnerability as all others. Horses lie down upon the earth, their breath steaming softly in the cool air, their tails swishing slowly, their bodies calm. The silence of the camp is profound, yet it is not weakness. It is the silence of strength at rest, of order sustained even in sleep. Think of the rivers of the empire. The Nile flows steadily through Egypt, its waters glistening beneath the moon, its banks quiet, its fields resting. The Tigris and Euphrates drift through Mesopotamia, their currents calm, their canals silent, their boats moored. The Indus flows eastward, carrying the reflection of stars across its dark surface. Along their banks, fishermen sleep beside nets neatly coiled. Farmers rest beside fields awaiting dawn. Children lie with their faces turned upward to the stars. The rivers move, yet they too seem hushed, slowed, content to mirror the stillness of night. In temples across the empire, lamps burn softly. In Babylon, a single flame glows before the statue of Marduk, its light small but steady. In Jerusalem, the rebuilt temple is quiet, its stones cool, its sacred space resting like the people who will return tomorrow. In Egypt, incense still smolders faintly, its smoke curling upward in delicate threads. In Persia itself, flames are tended gently upon altars, their glow soft, their warmth quiet. The gods are not abandoned. They are honored even in silence, their presence woven into the fabric of night as surely as into the rituals of day. The empire at rest is not fragile. It does not tremble when voices grow quiet, when roads fall silent, when markets close. Instead, its strength lies precisely in this balance, in the rhythm that allows for labor and for rest, for action and for pause, for day and for night. Just as the body breathes in and out, so too does the empire, inhaling with its armies and merchants and priests, exhaling in the stillness of night, steady, enduring, alive in both activity and in silence. As you linger in this vision, let the calmness of the empire's night become your own. See the flicker of torches, hear the soft crackle of fires, smell the faint sweetness of incense and bread. Feel the coolness of stone beneath your feet, the softness of woven mats beneath your body. Imagine the vast canopy of stars above, stretching not only over one village or one city, but over the entire empire, uniting millions beneath the same sky, cradling them all in the same silence. And as your breathing slows, let this empire at rest become your lullaby. It whispers that greatness is not only in conquest but in calmness, not only in monuments but in the breath of ordinary people sleeping in peace. Persia, in this moment, is not roaring, not conquering, not building. It is resting. And in its rest it is strong. Block 20. The eternal legacy of Persia. The Persian Empire was not only a realm of satrapies, roads, palaces, and armies. It was not only the treasury of gold, the discipline of the immortals, the chants in temples, or the endless caravans moving across deserts. It was, more deeply, a vision of what humanity could be when bound together not by erasure, but by harmony, when guided not by chaos, but by order. And though its stones have crumbled, though its palaces stand now as ruins, though the voices of its kings no longer echo in the courts of Susa or Persepolis, the essence of Persia remains like a fragrance lingering in the air long after the incense has burned away. It endures as memory, as influence, as a whisper that passes through centuries, reminding us that greatness is not only in conquest, but in the balance of diversity held gently within unity. Imagine once more the empire in its fullness. Close your eyes and let it unfold slowly, like dawn stretching across the horizon. See the satrapies glowing like constellations scattered across the earth. Babylon with its canals shimmering in lamplight. Egypt with its temples painted in colors still bright against stone. Media with its fires burning on high altars. Lydia with its coins clinking in busy markets. India with its spices perfuming the air. Bactria with its horsemen galloping across wide plains. Each satrapy distinct, each alive with its own rhythm, and yet all of them drawn together into one great pattern, as stars are drawn into constellations. Now let your mind travel along the royal roads, stretching thousands of kilometers like veins across the empire's body. In the day, they carried couriers, caravans, and soldiers, but at night they lie silent, their stones cool, their dust undisturbed, their milestones glowing faintly under the light of stars. Imagine walking there in silence, the air cool, the sky vast above you, no sound but the faint whisper of wind, no light but the glow of the heavens. The roads are empty, but they are not abandoned. They breathe with the memory of countless footsteps, countless hooves, countless voices that once filled their length. They are the arteries of empire, and even now in silence, they pulse faintly, as though the empire itself still breathes through them. Step into Persepolis in twilight, its wide stairways empty, its reliefs glowing faintly with the last rays of sun. The carved processions upon its walls still move in silence, Medes bearing gifts, Lydians carrying cups, Egyptians leading animals, Indians holding baskets of spices. They do not speak, yet their stone bodies whisper across time, telling us that Persia was never about one people alone, but about many walking together toward the same throne. The stairways rise into halls now broken, columns standing like trees without branches, yet even in ruin they do not fall into despair. They stand in dignity, bearing witness to a vision that outlived their builders. Picture Susa, once filled with tribute and scribes, now quiet. The treasuries where gold once shone are empty. The records pressed into clay lie broken. The voices of scribes are gone. But in the silence, you can still hear them if you listen. The scratch of styluses, the murmur of voices counting, the rustle of robes as numbers were read aloud. Their labor built order, and order built endurance. Even if the clay has shattered, the principle they lived endures still. Look to the army, once an ocean of order, now scattered into dust. Yet the rhythm of its steps still seems to echo across plains, as though the earth itself remembers the steady march of immortals, the thunder of cavalry, the quiet discipline of camps at night. They rest now in silence, their shields and spears rusted away, their banners torn, their horses long gone. But the discipline they embodied did not vanish. It became part of the memory of nations, a reminder that strength is not only in numbers but in unity, not only in weapons but in order. And then, the faiths, the countless voices that rose in prayer beneath Persia's canopy. Their temples have fallen, their fires have dimmed, their chants have faded into the wind, but still the memory of that reverence endures. The principle that faith is not to be silenced but allowed to breathe, that gods are not to be erased but honored, that unity does not require uniformity, this principle remains. It whispers across centuries, reminding us that the soul of a people cannot be crushed, that true greatness gives space for the sacred to flourish. Now let your vision expand outward. See the empire not as broken fragments, not as ruins scattered across maps, but as a vast canopy stretched across the night sky. Each star is a satrapy, each constellation a system of order, each cluster a memory of markets, of temples, of villages, of armies, of palaces. They do not vanish when the sun rises. They simply fade into the background, waiting to shine again when the world grows dark. So too does Persia's legacy. Not always visible, but always present, waiting, enduring, whispering. And in this whisper there is no roar of conquest, no clamor of armies, no clang of coins. There is only calmness. There is only the quiet strength of endurance. Persia at rest is not weak. It is eternal. It is not the noise of its kings we remember, but the silence of its vision. A silence that holds within it harmony, order, respect. The empire teaches us even now that the measure of greatness is not only in what is built, but in what endures when all else falls into ruin. As you linger in this vision, let the calmness of Persia's night carry you into rest. Imagine the stairways of Persepolis beneath stars, empty but dignified. Imagine the roads lying silent, their stones glowing faintly in moonlight. Imagine villages asleep, families resting, priests tending small flames, soldiers breathing quietly in their tents. Imagine rivers flowing slowly, carrying starlight across their surfaces. The empire sleeps, but in its sleep, it breathes, it endures, it whispers. And in this moment, let that whisper become your lullaby. Breathe with the empire, slow and steady. Feel the silence wrap around you, vast as the night sky, gentle as a mother's hand, enduring as the stars themselves. Persia rests, the world rests, and so too may you rest. Before you let sleep take you fully, let me gently invite you. If this journey through Persia has carried you, if it has calmed your mind and given your spirit quietness, leave a trace of that calm for others. Write your reflection in the comments, so that your voice becomes part of this chorus of memory. Like this video if it brought you peace. Subscribe to the channel so that you may return to other nights of story and stillness, and share it with others who long for rest. In doing so, you help carry forward this legacy, not of conquest, but of calm, not of noise, but of silence, not of destruction, but of harmony. Now close your eyes, feel the silence deepen. Let the stars wheel slowly above you. Persia fades into the distance, its palaces dim, its roads empty, its voices quiet. But its whisper remains, eternal as the heavens. Let it cradle you, let it guide you, let it rest with you. For the empire may be gone, but the calmness it leaves is eternal, and tonight it belongs to you.